Hello everyone and welcome back to the Unexplained Diaries. Here on this channel I share real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. The power went out right as I was rinsing a mug. Everything just dropped at once. Lights, fridge, the faint background hum of the house, gone. It wasn't a flicker. It was immediate and total. My name's Darren. I live out on the edge of a small wooded area, a few houses spaced out along a narrow road. When the power cuts, it gets properly dark out here. No streetlights, no glow from nearby buildings. I stood there for a second, waiting for it to come back on. Sometimes it does. It didn't. I set the mug down and felt around the counter for my phone. The screen lit up the kitchen just enough to see by. 12:18 a.m. I checked the signal. Still had service. No notifications about outages yet. I moved through the house slowly, checking a couple things out of habit. Everything was dead. Even the little indicator lights on the appliances were gone. The silence was the first thing that got to me. You don't realize how much noise there usually is until it's not there. Then I heard the radio. I kept a small, battery-powered one in the living room, mostly for storms or outages. I hadn't turned it on that night, but now there was a sound coming from that direction. Not music. Not static. A low, steady hum. I walked into the living room and saw the radio sitting on the shelf by the window. The dial was still set to the same station I'd last used, but the usual signal wasn't there. Just that hum. It wasn't loud, but it was clear. A single tone, slightly vibrating, like it wasn't perfectly stable. I stepped closer and picked it up. The hum didn't change. I adjusted the volume. It got louder, but the tone stayed the same. I turned the dial, slowly moving through the frequencies. Nothing else came in. No static bursts, no fragments of stations, just that same low hum across the entire band. I frowned, trying to figure out what could cause that. Even with weak signal, you usually get something. This felt uniform. Like the radio wasn't picking up anything except that one tone. I carried it over to the window without really thinking about it. Outside, everything was black. The trees along the edge of the property were just shapes against the sky. I stood there for a second, listening to the hum and staring out. That's when I noticed the light. It wasn't bright at first, just a faint pale glow above the tree line. Off to the right, where the woods dipped slightly before rising again. I leaned closer to the glass. The glow stayed in place. It didn't flicker, didn't move, just hung there. Higher than the trees, but not far into the sky. I unlocked the door and stepped outside onto the back porch. The air felt cooler than it had earlier. Not dramatically, but enough to notice. The hum from the radio seemed louder out there, or maybe it just felt that way without the walls around me. I looked back at it in my hand. Still the same tone. I looked up again. The light was clearer now, a pale, almost white glow, soft edges, no defined shape, just a presence in the sky. It didn't cast light onto the ground. The trees below it were still dark. The yard looked exactly the same. It was like the light existed on its own, separate from everything else. I took a few steps off the porch. The gravel crunched under my feet, louder than usual in the quiet. The hum in the radio didn't change. The light didn't react. I stopped and stood there looking up at it, trying to figure out what it could be. Plane didn't make sense. It wasn't moving. No blinking lights, no sound. Drone didn't fit either. Too high, too steady. And again, no sound. I held the radio up slightly, like that would somehow affect it. The tone continued. Unchanging. I noticed then that it wasn't perfectly steady. There was a slight oscillation to it, a very subtle rise and fall in pitch, almost like breathing. I swallowed, my ears popping slightly. That same pressure I'd felt before in other situations, but lighter this time, still noticeable. I shifted my weight, looking around the rest of the sky. Nothing else stood out, just that one light. I checked my phone again. 12:23. 5 minutes since the power went out. The light hadn't moved at all. The hum hadn't stopped. I walked a few steps further into the yard, trying to get a better angle. The trees framed the light differently, but it stayed in the same position relative to them. Completely fixed. I don't know how long I stood there. It didn't feel long. But when I checked the time again, it was 12:29. I hadn't noticed 6 minutes passing. The hum was still going. The light was still there. Nothing had changed. I felt this growing unease, not because anything was happening, but because nothing was. Everything was too consistent, too still. Then, without warning, the power came back. All at once. The house lights snapped on behind me, spilling onto the yard. The hum from the radio cut out instantly, replaced by a burst of static and then the normal station coming back in. I flinched slightly at the sudden noise. When I looked up again, the light was gone. Not fading, not moving away, just gone. The sky was empty. The tree line looked normal again. I stood there for a second, the radio still in my hand, now playing music like nothing had happened. I turned slowly, scanning the area. Nothing. No residual glow, no sound. Just the normal nighttime noises starting to come back. A faint breeze, something moving in the brush. I went back inside and set the radio down. Everything in the house was working again. Clocks blinking, appliances humming back to life. I checked the breakers out of habit, all fine. No tripped switches. I checked my phone one more time. 12:30. It felt like more time had passed than that. I walked back to the window and looked out again. The trees were just trees. The sky was just sky. But the part I keep thinking about is how the radio changed at the exact moment the power went out. How it didn't pick up anything except that one tone, and how the light appeared at the same time, stayed perfectly still the entire time, and disappeared the second everything else came back, like whatever it was, only existed during that gap, those few minutes where everything else had stopped, and then left without leaving anything behind once it was over. I only noticed it when I got back inside and started going through the photos. Up until that point, the night had been completely normal. My name's Callum. I'd driven out to this stretch of open farmland about 20 minutes from town. Flat land, no street lights, just hedgerows and fields. It was one of the few places nearby where you could actually see the stars properly. It was late summer, still warm even after midnight. Clear sky, no clouds, barely any wind. I'd parked my car off a narrow lane and walked out into the field with a tripod and my camera. I'm not a professional or anything, just something I do sometimes when the weather's right. Everything looked perfect. You could see the Milky Way faintly, and a few satellites moving slowly across the sky if you waited long enough. I set up the tripod, framed the shot, and started taking long exposures, 30 seconds each. I'd take one, wait, take another. Nothing unusual, just the usual quiet, distant hum of a car every now and then, maybe an owl somewhere far off. After about 15 minutes, I noticed something small, not in the sky, on the ground. The grass around me was moving slightly, not like wind. It was too local, just a patch, maybe a few feet across, a little off to my right. I crouched down and looked at it. It wasn't bending in a direction. It was more like trembling, subtle, easy to miss. I reached out and held my hand just above it. Didn't feel anything. No warmth, no air movement. I straightened up and looked around. Everything else was still. I stepped back a bit. The movement stopped. I stepped closer again. After a second or two, it started up again. Same faint trembling. I remember thinking it might be insects or something underground. It didn't feel like a big deal, just odd. I went back to the camera, took another shot, checked the settings, adjusted the angle slightly to get more of the sky. I kept shooting for another 10 minutes or so. At one point, I had this strange feeling that something was off with the sky itself. Not obvious, just like something didn't line up right. I looked up directly. Everything looked normal. Stars were where they should be. No movement other than the usual slow drift. I even picked out a couple constellations to ground myself. Everything matched. I shrugged it off, took a few more photos, then packed up. By the time I got back to the car, it was around 1:20 a.m. I sat in the driver's seat and started flipping through the images on the camera screen. First few looked good, clear, sharp, exactly what I expected. Then I hit one that made me pause. It looked wrong immediately. There was a section of the sky, upper left of the frame, where the stars just weren't there. Not missing like a cloud had passed over. It was darker than the rest of the sky. Not black, just a slightly deeper shade, like something was blocking the stars behind it. The shape wasn't clear at first glance, but the longer I looked, the more defined it became. Edges, subtle. Curved in some places, straight in others. Big. A lot bigger than I would have expected anything to be. It took up maybe a quarter of the frame. I zoomed in on the screen. The stars around it were sharp, but right where that shape was, there was nothing. No blur, no distortion, just absence. I flipped back to the previous image. Normal. Stars everywhere. Same section of sky, same framing. Nothing unusual. I went forward again. The dark shape was back. Then the next image after that. Normal again. I sat there for a minute, trying to figure out if it was something wrong with the camera. A glitch. Maybe the sensor had misread something, but the rest of the image was fine. No noise, no artifacts, just that one area. I zoomed in as much as I could. The edge of the shape wasn't perfectly sharp. It had a slight softness to it, but it was still clearly defined, like something solid had been there, just not reflecting any light. I got out of the car again, looked up at the same patch of sky. Nothing, just stars. I stood there for a while, comparing what I was seeing to what was in the photo. It didn't make sense. I hadn't noticed anything while I was out there. No movement, no change in brightness. Nothing passing overhead. If something that big had been above me, I felt like I should have seen something, heard something, felt something, but there'd been nothing. I walked back to where I'd been standing earlier, shined my phone light over the grass. The patch I'd noticed before looked normal now. No movement, no sign anything had been different. I turned the light off and stood in the dark again, looked up. Still nothing. I went back to the car and checked the timestamps. The photo with the shape was taken at 1:07 a.m. The ones before and after were 1:06 and 1:08. So it had been there for at least one exposure, 30 seconds, possibly longer. I scrolled through the rest of the photos again. Only that one image showed it. I sat there with the camera in my hands, just staring at that frame, trying to convince myself it was a glitch, something explainable. But the more I looked at it, the more it felt like something had been there, something I just hadn't seen. I drove home after that. Didn't stay any longer. The whole way back, I kept thinking about how I hadn't noticed anything in the moment. No shadow passing over me, no change in the light, no sound, just that one photo. When I got home, I transferred the images to my laptop, looked at them on a bigger screen. The shape was even clearer, still subtle, but unmistakable. Like a gap in the sky where something had been blocking the stars completely. I checked the metadata. Everything looked normal, no errors, no anomalies, just a standard long exposure. I compared it with the others again. Same settings, same position, same everything, except for that one frame. I went outside once more before going to bed. Looked up from my backyard. The sky was the same as it had been earlier. Clear, open, nothing out of place. But I kept thinking about that shape. How big it must have been, how close, and how it had been there long enough to be captured without me ever seeing it, standing right underneath it the entire time, watching the sky and somehow missing something that blocked out that much of it completely. I saw it before the sun came up, when everything was still that flat gray blue you get just before daylight. My name's Aaron. I'd driven out early to hike a ridge trail I'd been meaning to check out for a while. It's a few miles outside town, nothing extreme, just a gradual climb with a long stretch along the top that overlooks a valley. I started just after 5 a.m. No one else in the parking area, just my car and one other truck that looked like it had been there overnight. It was cold enough that I could see my breath, but not freezing. The ground was dry, no frost. The sky was mostly clear with some low clouds drifting across the ridgeline. The trail was easy to follow, and I had a headlamp on for the first part, but I turned it off once my eyes adjusted. That early light is enough to see shapes, just not details. I'd been hiking maybe 20 minutes when I first noticed the glow. It wasn't in front of me, it was off to the right, across a shallow dip in the terrain, along the higher ridge that ran parallel to the trail. At first, I thought it was someone else hiking with a light. It had that kind of color, orange warm, but dim. Not like a flashlight beam, more like a small, steady glow. I stopped walking and watched it. It moved, slowly, following the line of the ridge. I could see the silhouette of the terrain against the sky, and the light tracked along it, staying just above the ground. That's what made me think it was a person at first. But something about it didn't match. There was no beam, no spread, just a single point of light moving along the ridge. And it didn't bob. When someone walks with a light, even if they're steady, there's always a slight up and down motion. This didn't have that. It stayed perfectly level relative to the ground, like it was gliding. I started walking again, slower this time, keeping my eyes on it. The trail curved slightly, bringing me a little closer to that side of the ridge. The light kept moving. Same speed, same height. I tried to judge the distance. Maybe a couple hundred yards away. Hard to tell in that light. I stopped again and listened. No footsteps, no voices, no sound of gravel or gear. Just the usual early morning quiet. A faint breeze through the brush. Nothing else. The light continued along the ridge, following the contour of the land exactly. When the ground rose, it rose with it. When it dipped slightly, it dipped. But it did it too smoothly, too precisely, like it was locked to the shape of the terrain. I remember thinking maybe it was some kind of animal with a tag or something reflective. But that didn't make sense either. It wasn't reflecting anything. It was its own light. And it wasn't moving like an animal. No sudden changes, no pauses, just a steady, controlled motion. I pulled my phone out and tried to zoom in. It didn't help. The light just looked like a faint dot on the screen. I lowered the phone and kept watching. The sky was getting slightly brighter now. Still not sunrise, but enough that the outline of the ridge was clearer. I could see there was nothing else around the light. No person. No shape. Just that glow. It moved along for another minute or so. Then it slowed. Not abruptly, just gradually, until it came to a stop near a higher point on the ridge. It stayed there, hovering just above the ground. I stood still, watching it, waiting for something to happen. A few seconds passed. Then it moved again, but not along the ridge this time. It went up, straight up, no angle, no curve, just vertical. I blinked, thinking I'd misjudged the perspective, but no, it was rising, leaving the line of the terrain, climbing into the air. It didn't speed up, didn't slow down, just a constant upward motion, completely silent. I felt that pressure in my ears again, like when you go up an elevation too quickly. I swallowed, tried to clear it. It didn't fully go away. The light kept rising. Now it was clearly above the ridge, against the sky. Still the same size, still the same color, no flicker, no change. It reached the level of the low clouds, those thin patches drifting across the ridge. The light didn't illuminate them, didn't cast anything. It just passed into them. For a second, I could still see it through the cloud, faintly, like a muted glow behind a thin layer. Then it faded, not like it turned off, more like it was being absorbed by the cloud, until there was nothing, just the normal gray of the sky. I stood there for a while, staring at the spot where it disappeared. Nothing else moved, no second light, no sound, just the slow drift of the clouds. I checked the time, 5:32. I'd been watching it for longer than I thought. I looked around, half expecting someone else to be out there. There wasn't anyone. The trail behind me was empty. The ridge ahead was empty. No sign of anyone who could have been carrying a light. I kept hiking after that. Made it to the top of the ridge just before sunrise. The view was normal. Nothing out of place. I even walked over toward where I thought I'd seen the light moving earlier. There was nothing there. No tracks. No marks, just dry ground and scattered rocks. I stood there for a bit, trying to line up the position, trying to figure out if I'd misjudged the distance. But it didn't help. The space looked completely ordinary. I headed back down once the sun came up. The whole way down, everything felt normal again. Birds started making noise, the air warmed up slightly, just a regular morning. But the part that keeps sticking with me is how the light moved along the ridge, how it followed the terrain perfectly without any of the small movements you'd expect from a person, and how when it stopped, it didn't turn or change direction. It just went straight up, like whatever it was done moving along the ground and needed to leave without making a sound, without leaving anything behind, just disappearing into the clouds, like it had never been part of the landscape at all. I started noticing it because the dog wouldn't go near that part of the field anymore. My name's Owen. I run a small farm just outside a village, nothing huge, just a few acres, mostly open land with a long stretch of field behind the house. I've been there a few years, same routines every day, so when something changes, it stands out. The first time I saw the glow, I thought it was just headlights from the road cutting across the field at an angle. It was late, around 10:40 p.m. I remember because I'd just finished locking up the shed and was heading back toward the house. The sky was clear, cold enough that the ground felt firm underfoot. I glanced out over the field and saw this faint patch of light, low to the ground. Not bright, just enough to notice. It covered maybe a circle 10, 15 feet across, somewhere near the far end of the field. I stopped walking and stared at it, tried to figure out the angle. There's a road a good distance behind that part of the property, but the light didn't line up with it, and it wasn't moving. If it were headlights, it should have shifted. Instead, it stayed fixed in place. I took a few steps toward it. As soon as I did, the glow faded. Not instantly, just dimmed until it was gone. The field went back to looking the way it always did at night, flat and dark. I stood there for a bit, thinking maybe it had just been my eyes adjusting. Then I shrugged it off and went inside. But the next night, it happened again, same time. I was out a little earlier, feeding the dog and checking the fence line. I wasn't even thinking about the night before. Then I saw it. Same spot, same faint glow. Again, it looked like it was sitting just above the ground, not lighting up the area around it, just existing there. I stopped immediately this time. Didn't move toward it right away, just watched. It didn't flicker, didn't change shape, just a steady, pale light. The dog was with me then, a collie named Jess. She saw it too. I could tell from the way she stiffened, ears forward, body tense, but she didn't bark, didn't move toward it either, just stood there, staring. I took a slow step forward. Jess stayed where she was. The glow faded again. Same as before, gradual, gone within a few seconds. I walked out to where it had been. The ground looked normal, no marks, no heat, no change in the grass. I crouched down and touched the soil, cold, same as everywhere else. I stood up and looked around, trying to find any explanation. There wasn't one. After that, I started paying attention to the time. It was always around 10:40, give or take a minute, and it didn't happen every night, but often enough that I couldn't ignore it. Maybe 4 or 5 times a week. Always the same patch, always the same size, always fading by the time I got close. Jess stopped going near that part of the field altogether. Even during the day, she'd skirt around it. Not a big wide circle, just enough that it stood out. Animals usually get over things quickly. She didn't. A couple nights later, I decided to get out there earlier. I set an alarm for 10:30, went outside and waited. Cold night again, clear sky, no wind. Jess stayed near the house, watching me, but not coming out. I stood there facing the field, arms crossed, just waiting. 10:38, nothing, still nothing. Then at around 10:40, it appeared. No buildup, no gradual brightening. It was just there, that same faint glow like a soft light pressed against the ground. I didn't move this time. I stayed where I was and watched it. It held steady, didn't react to me standing there, didn't shift or change. I took a small step forward. It didn't fade immediately this time. It stayed. That was new. I took another step. Still there. Jess whined softly from behind me. I didn't turn around. I kept my eyes on the glow. Another step. Now I was maybe halfway across the field. The glow started to dim. Slowly. I stopped walking. It held for a second like it was deciding something. Then it faded again. Gone. I walked the rest of the way to the spot, same as before. Nothing unusual, no warmth, no mark in the grass. Just the same patch of ground. I stood there longer than usual, trying to see if it would come back. It didn't. I went back inside after that. But the next time it happened, something was different. It was a foggy night. Not thick, just a low mist hanging over the field. I almost didn't go out, but I checked the time and figured I'd at least look. When I stepped outside, I saw the glow right away. It was brighter this time. Not by a lot, but enough that it stood out more clearly through the fog. And the fog around it behaved strangely. It didn't scatter the light. It didn't glow the way fog usually does when light hits it. Instead, it seemed to bend around the glow, like it was avoiding it. I walked out again, slower this time. Jess didn't come with me. I could hear her pacing near the back door. The glow stayed steady as I approached. The fog shifted slightly with the breeze, but not over that spot. It parted around it. I stopped maybe 20 feet away, closer than I'd been before. The glow didn't fade right away. It stayed, longer than usual. I felt that pressure in my ears again. Subtle, but there, like the air had thickened. I took one more step. The glow dimmed, then faded out, leaving the fog to settle back into place. I stood there, listening. Nothing, no sound, no movement, just the quiet of the field. I walked back to the house slowly. Jess met me at the door but didn't step past it. I looked back over my shoulder once. The field was dark again, normal. But the part that keeps getting to me isn't just that it appears at the same time or that it fades when I get close. It's that it seems to wait. Like it knows when I'm watching. And the closer I get, the longer it stays until there's a point where it decides that's enough and disappears, leaving nothing behind except the same piece of ground that my dog still refuses to walk across, even in the middle of the day. I first noticed it because it didn't fade when I turned a corner. My name's Darren. I was walking home from a late shift around 1 a.m., cutting through a quiet residential area. It's the kind of place where everything shuts down early. No traffic, no people, just rows of houses and long stretches of pavement under streetlights. It had rained earlier, so the ground was still damp, and everything had that faint, reflective shine to it. I had my hands in my pockets, head down, just trying to get home. That's when I heard it. A low hum. Not loud, not even clear at first, just something I picked up without thinking about it. I assumed it was something distant, maybe a transformer or a plane far overhead. I kept walking. The sound stayed, steady, constant, not getting louder, not getting quieter, just there. After a few seconds, I realized something felt off. Usually when you walk past something making noise, it shifts, it changes direction, fades, gets stronger. This didn't. It stayed exactly the same. I slowed down, listened, still the same. I stopped completely. The hum stayed. I looked around. Nothing. The street was empty. No cars, no lights on in the houses except the occasional window. I tilted my head slightly, trying to figure out where it was coming from. That's when I noticed it wasn't coming from ahead of me or behind me. It felt like it was directly above me. I looked up, clear sky. A few clouds drifting slowly, but mostly open. Stars visible between the streetlights, nothing unusual. No aircraft lights, no movement, just empty sky. I waited a few seconds, standing there. The hum didn't change. I started walking again. The sound moved with me, same position, same volume, like it was locked above my head. I picked up my pace a little. The hum stayed perfectly consistent, no delay, no shift. I turned onto the next street. Same thing, still directly overhead. I stopped again, right under a streetlight. The light buzzed faintly like they always do, but that wasn't it. This was separate, lower, smoother, more even. I stepped forward out of the light, then back into it. The hum didn't react at all. That's when I noticed something else. Under the streetlight, the sound seemed to disappear. Not completely, but it dropped just enough that I could barely hear it. I stepped forward again, out of the light. The hum came back, stronger, clearer. I went back under the light. It softened again. That didn't make sense. Streetlights don't block sound. I stood there for a second, testing it. Step forward, louder. Step back, quieter. Same pattern every time. I looked up again, directly above me. Still nothing. No shape, no glow. Nothing to match the sound. I felt that pressure in my ears then. Subtle at first, like when you're going up in an elevator. I swallowed. It didn't go away. I rubbed my jaw trying to clear it. Still there. I started walking again, faster this time. The hum stayed centered above me. No matter how I moved, it tracked perfectly. I crossed another street, past a row of parked cars. The sound didn't reflect or echo off anything. It just stayed where it was. Fixed. I stopped suddenly. The hum stopped with me. No drift, no continuation, just instant. That's what really got to me. I took a step to the side. The sound shifted with me, instantly. I tried it again, a little quicker. Same result. It wasn't following me from a distance. It was staying directly above me, locked in place. I didn't like that. I looked around again, more carefully this time. The houses felt darker than they should have. Not unlit, just quieter, like the usual background noise was missing. No distant traffic, no wind. Even the occasional hum from power lines seemed muted. I checked my phone. 1:18 a.m. I hadn't been walking that long, but it felt like more time had passed. I shook it off and kept going. My street was only a few minutes away. The hum didn't change, didn't fade, didn't get stronger, just stayed. I tried ignoring it, focused on the rhythm of my steps, the sound of my shoes on the pavement, but the hum sat underneath everything. Constant, unavoidable. I turned onto my street. The houses here are closer together, more streetlights. I stepped under the first one. The hum dropped again, not gone, just weaker. I walked quickly to the next one, same effect. Between the lights, it was clearer. Under them, it softened. I moved from one pool of light to the next, almost without thinking. Each time I stepped into the light, the pressure in my ears eased slightly. Each time I stepped out, it came back, stronger. I got to my driveway, paused for a second before going up to the door. The hum was still there, directly above. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The moment the door closed behind me, the sound stopped. Completely. No fade, no lingering. Just gone. The silence felt heavy, like something had been filling the space and suddenly wasn't anymore. I stood there in the hallway, listening. Nothing. Just the normal quiet of the house. I set my keys down slowly, walked into the living room. Everything was normal. Lights off, clock ticking. I went to the front window and looked outside. The street was empty. Still. I stepped back outside onto the porch. The hum came back immediately. Same position, same volume, directly overhead. I stepped back inside. Gone again. I tested it a few more times, in and out. Each time, the same result. Outside, there. Inside, nothing. I closed the door and locked it. Didn't go back out again. I stayed up for a while, sitting in the dark, just listening, trying to hear anything through the walls. There was nothing. But the part I keep thinking about isn't just that the sound followed me. It's how precise it was, how it stayed exactly above me the entire time, and how the moment I stepped inside, it stopped. Like whatever it was had been right there the whole walk home, just out of sight, matching every step and waiting until I was out of reach before going completely silent. I was about 10 cars back from the lights when it happened. My name's Lewis. This was on a weekday early evening just after 6 p.m. I was stuck in traffic on a main road that runs through the edge of town. 2 lanes each way, shops on one side, a line of houses on the other. It had been a warm day, but the sky was starting to dim a bit, that in-between light where everything looks slightly off without you really noticing why. I had the radio on low, just background noise, while I waited for the lights to change. Cars weren't moving much, just that slow crawl forward every few seconds. Nothing unusual. I remember tapping the steering wheel, watching the car ahead inch forward, thinking about getting home. Then the radio cut out. Not like when you lose signal driving under a bridge. It didn't fade. It just switched instantly to static. Loud. Sharp. I flinched and turned the volume knob down, but the static didn't change. It stayed at the same level, like the controls weren't affecting it. I tapped the screen, thinking maybe it had glitched. Switched stations. Same thing. Just static. I glanced at the dash. Everything else looked normal. No warning lights. No flicker. Just the radio. I leaned back slightly and looked out the window. The car next to me, driver, had his head tilted down, messing with his stereo too. I could see his hand moving over the controls, then stopping. He looked up, confused. A second later, the car in front of me, the driver shifted in his seat. Not like he was adjusting, more like he just noticed something. Then he looked up, not forward, up. At the same time, the guy in the car next to me did the same thing. Then another driver ahead, and another. It wasn't coordinated in a way you'd expect, but it was close, like a delay of half a second between each person. Heads tilting upward, eyes focused above the road. I felt that pressure in my ears then. Sudden, sharp, like being in a plane when it changes altitude too fast. I swallowed. It didn't clear. I reached for the door handle like I was about to get out, but I didn't. Instead, I looked up too, through the windshield. At first, I didn't see anything, just the sky, a pale gray blue with thin cloud cover. Nothing moving, nothing obvious, but something felt wrong, like the sky wasn't sitting where it should. It's hard to explain, like the depth was off, like looking at something through glass that isn't flat. I narrowed my eyes, trying to focus. That's when I noticed it. Not a shape, exactly. More like a section of the sky that didn't match the rest, a wide area, maybe directly above the line of traffic. It wasn't darker, it wasn't lighter, it was just off. The clouds in that section looked slightly warped, not swirling, not moving, just bent, like they were wrapping around something I couldn't see. I leaned forward a little, gripping the wheel tighter. The static from the radio filled the car. Constant, no variation. I glanced around again. Every driver I could see was looking up, not talking, not reacting loudly, just staring. One guy a few cars ahead had his door open, one foot on the ground, still looking up. No one was honking, no one was moving. The entire line of traffic had just stopped. Completely. I looked back up. The warped section shifted slightly, not across the sky, but in place, like something beneath it had moved. The clouds adjusted around it in a way that didn't follow any wind pattern, more like a ripple, but slower, controlled. My ears popped again, harder this time. I winced and pressed my tongue to the roof of my mouth, trying to relieve the pressure. It didn't help. The static got louder for a second, or maybe it just felt louder. Then it leveled out again. I checked my phone out of instinct. No signal, just empty bars. I hadn't noticed when that happened. I looked back up again. The warped area was still there, still subtle, still hard to define, but definitely not part of the sky. I had this sudden feeling like I wasn't supposed to be looking at it. Not fear exactly, more like awareness, like noticing something you shouldn't have noticed. The kind of feeling that makes you want to look away without knowing why. I didn't look away. I kept staring, trying to figure out what I was seeing. Then, without warning, it shifted again, this time more noticeably. The warped section pulled inward slightly, as if whatever was causing it was moving away from the surface of the sky. The clouds straightened out behind it, just a little, but enough to see the difference. Then it happened again. Another subtle pull, another correction in the clouds, like something lifting upward. I held my breath, watched it happen a third time. Then it was gone. Not faded, not moved out of view, just gone. The sky snapped back to normal, clouds evenly spaced again, no distortion, nothing out of place. At the exact same moment, the radio cut back to normal. Music mid-song, no transition, no fade, just like it had never stopped. I blinked a few times, trying to process it. Around me, drivers lowered their heads almost in sync, looking forward again, hands going back to steering wheels. Someone honked behind me. Short, impatient. The car ahead started moving. Traffic resumed, like nothing had happened. I drove forward with the rest of them, heart still beating faster than it should have been. I glanced at the driver next to me. He looked straight ahead, no expression, like he'd just woken up from something. I wanted to say something, roll the window down, ask if he'd seen it, but I didn't. Something about it made that feel wrong, like breaking a rule I didn't understand. I kept driving, turned onto my street a few minutes later. Everything felt normal again. Radio working, phone signal back, no pressure in my ears. That night, I sat in my car for a while after parking, just replaying it, trying to make sense of what I'd seen, what we'd all seen. But the part that keeps sticking with me isn't just the distortion in the sky, it's how everyone reacted. How every driver looked up at the same time and then just as quickly went back to normal without a word, like whatever was there was something we all noticed, but weren't supposed to acknowledge, even to each other, even afterward, like it only existed for as long as we were looking, and the moment it was gone, so was any reason to talk about it. It happened right as we reached the end of my street. My name's Liam. I used to walk my dog late most nights, just a quick loop around the neighborhood before bed. Nothing unusual. Same route every time. Quiet area, mostly families, a few older houses mixed in with newer ones. That night was still and dry. No wind, no rain, just that kind of silence you get after midnight when everyone's asleep. My dog Baxter was a lab mix, pretty laid back. He usually just sniffed everything and dragged his feet. We were halfway down the street when I noticed the first thing. He stopped. Not paused. Stopped, like something had caught his attention. He wasn't looking at the ground either. His head was tilted slightly upward, ears forward, body stiff. I followed his gaze. Nothing there. Just the row of houses, dim porch lights, a couple of street lights spaced out along the road. "Come on," I said, giving the leash a light tug. He didn't move. I tugged again. Still nothing. He let out this low, quiet sound, not quite a growl, more like a warning under his breath. That wasn't normal for him. I looked around again. Everything seemed fine. No people, no cars, no movement. Then, all at once, every light on the street flickered. Not just one or two. All of them. Street lights, porch lights, even the small security light on the corner house. They dimmed for a split second, like the power dipped, then came back. At the exact same time. I froze. Baxter flinched. His ears dropped slightly and he pressed closer to my leg. I remember thinking it was probably just a power issue. Something in the grid, but it felt off, too synchronized, too clean. The lights didn't buzz or flicker unevenly. They just blinked, perfectly in sync. I stood there for a moment, waiting to see if it would happen again. Nothing. Everything stayed steady. I exhaled slowly and started walking again. Baxter moved this time, but slower than usual. He kept glancing ahead. So did I. We got closer to the end of the block. There's a gap between two houses there, just enough space to see through to the next street behind. A narrow strip of yard on either side, with a low fence separating them. That's where I saw it. At first, I thought it was just my eyes adjusting. A pale shape moving between the houses, not bright, not glowing like a light, just lighter than the darkness around it. I slowed down, took a few careful steps forward. The shape was already halfway across the gap. It didn't look solid, but it wasn't transparent either. More like something you could almost see through, but not quite. It moved smoothly. No sound, no footsteps, no rustling, just a steady glide from one side to the other. Baxter stopped again. This time he didn't growl. He just stood there, completely still. I could feel the leash go tight. I didn't pull him. I didn't want to move either. I watched the shape reach the other side of the gap. For a second it paused, or maybe it just slowed. I couldn't tell. It had no clear edges, no features, just a vague outline, like something slightly out of focus. Then it continued and disappeared behind the house. Not like it turned a corner, more like it faded into the darkness. 1 second it was there, the next it wasn't. I stood there, staring at the empty space, waiting for something else to happen. Nothing did. The lights stayed on, no flickering, no sounds, no movement. I stepped forward slowly, pulling Baxter with me. He resisted at first, then followed reluctantly. We reached the gap between the houses. I leaned slightly to look through. The yard behind was empty, just a fence, a small shed, and a tree near the back. No movement, no sign of anything passing through. I took a few steps into the gap. Baxter didn't want to come. I had to coax him. Even then, he stayed close behind me. I shined my phone light around. Nothing unusual. Grass, fence, a couple of garden tools leaning against the shed. No footprints, no disturbed ground. I turned the light off and stood there for a second, listening. Still nothing. No wind, no insects, just that same quiet. I felt that pressure in my ears then, like before a storm. I swallowed. It didn't go away right away. I stepped back out to the sidewalk. The pressure eased slightly. I looked up at the houses. All the lights were steady. Normal, like nothing had happened. I checked the time on my phone. It was later than I expected. Not by much, maybe 10, 15 minutes. But it felt like less time had passed. I couldn't shake that. I turned around and headed back the way we came. Baxter stayed close the whole time. Didn't stop, didn't sniff anything, just walked. Every now and then I glanced back toward the end of the block, half expecting to see that shape again. I didn't. Everything looked normal. I got home, unlocked the door, and let Baxter inside. He went straight to his bed and lay down. Didn't even go to his water bowl. I stood in the doorway for a minute, looking back out at the street. All the lights were still on, no flickering, no movement, just quiet. I went inside and locked the door. Later, I checked the security camera on the front of my house. It had a clear view down most of the street. I scrubbed through the footage from when I'd been out. There was a moment where all the lights dimmed, just like I remembered, perfectly in sync. But when I got to the part where I saw the shape, there was nothing. Just me standing there with Baxter, looking toward the end of the block, at something that wasn't on the recording. I watched it a few times, trying to see if I'd missed something. I hadn't. There was nothing there, but I could see my own posture change, the way I'd stopped, the way Baxter had stiffened. Both of us reacting to something, just not anything the camera could pick up. I still walk him at night sometimes. Same route, same time. But every time we get close to that gap between the houses, I find myself slowing down, watching that space, waiting to see if something else will cross through it again, quietly, like it belongs there, even when nothing else does. I noticed it because I couldn't find a constellation I knew was supposed to be there. My name's Darren. I live in a small village on the edge of open farmland. Not much light pollution if you step away from the street. That night, I was sitting out back on one of those cheap plastic chairs, just killing time. It was late, probably close to 1 in the morning. Warm for once, no wind, clear sky. I'd been out there a while already, just looking up, not really thinking about anything. I always look for the same few things out of habit. Orion when it's in season, the Big Dipper, stuff like that. I'm not into astronomy or anything, I just know where a few patterns are. That's when I realized something didn't line up. There was a patch of sky where there should have been stars, and there weren't. At first, I thought clouds, but there weren't any clouds anywhere else. The sky was completely clear. I sat forward a bit, squinting up. The patch wasn't big, maybe the size of my thumb if I held it out at arm's length, just darker than everything around it. Not black exactly, just empty, like someone had cut a hole out of the sky. I blinked a few times, thinking maybe my eyes were playing tricks. Looked away for a second, looked back, still there. I stood up slowly, walked a few steps into the yard to get a different angle. It stayed in the same spot relative to everything else. That's when I noticed it was moving. Not fast, very slow, barely noticeable at first. It was drifting, sliding across the sky, and as it moved, stars reappeared behind it, clear as anything, exactly where they should be. I felt this weird tightening in my chest, not panic, just wrong, like I was watching something I wasn't supposed to see. I tried to convince myself it was a cloud again, maybe a thin one, but it didn't behave like a cloud. There was no texture, no edges. It didn't blur the stars, it just removed them, cleanly. I kept watching it, didn't take my eyes off it. The movement was steady, straight line, no wobble, no change in speed. I turned slightly, checking the rest of the sky. Everything else looked normal. Stars everywhere, sharp, still. No planes, no blinking lights, just that one patch moving. I realized I hadn't heard anything for a while. No wind, no distant cars, no insects. That was the next thing that got to me. Usually there's always something. A dog barking somewhere, a car passing on the main road. That night, nothing, just silence. I shifted my weight, suddenly aware of how quiet it was. I looked back up. The patch had moved further now, crossing into a denser area of stars, which made it more obvious, more noticeable. I could see exactly where it was because of what wasn't there. I stepped closer to the fence line, like that would somehow help. It didn't. It just made me feel more exposed. I don't know why. I remember rubbing my arms without realizing it, like I was cold, even though I wasn't. The patch kept moving, same steady pace. Then I noticed something else. There was no flicker around it, no distortion. The stars didn't warp at the edges. They were just gone inside it and perfectly normal outside. Like the sky itself was intact, just missing pieces. I reached into my pocket for my phone, thought about recording it, but I hesitated. I don't know why. Part of me didn't want to look away. Like if I did, it would be gone when I looked back. I pulled the phone out anyway, opened the camera, pointed it up. I couldn't see anything on the screen, just normal stars, no dark patch. I moved the phone around, trying different angles. Nothing. I lowered it, looked up again. The patch was still there, clear as day. Well, not day, but clear. I tried again with the phone, same result, it didn't show up. That made my stomach drop a bit. I put the phone back in my pocket. Didn't feel like messing with it anymore. I just watched. The patch drifted further, almost directly overhead now. I had to tilt my head back more to keep it in view. That's when I noticed the pressure in my ears. Subtle at first, like being in an elevator. I swallowed. It didn't clear. The pressure built slightly, not painful, just uncomfortable. I kept watching. The patch passed directly above me. For a second, it felt like everything got a little heavier, like the air itself pressed down. Then it eased. The silence broke slightly too. I could hear something again. Distant, faint, like the world was slowly coming back. The patch kept moving, heading away now, toward the fields behind my house. As it moved, the stars filled back in behind it, perfectly. No delay, no fade. Just there again. I turned slowly, following it as far as I could. It got smaller the further it went. Or maybe just harder to see. Eventually it blended into the sky, or disappeared. I'm not sure which. I stood there for a while after, just staring at the same spot. Everything looked normal again. Stars where they should be. No gaps, no movement. The sounds came back fully after that. Insects. A car in the distance, a dog barking somewhere. I didn't move right away, just stood there trying to process what I'd seen. I checked the time on my phone. It didn't line up with how long I felt like I had been standing there. It was later than I expected, by enough that it didn't make sense. I went back inside after a while. Locked the door. Didn't sleep much. I went out again the next night. Same time, same spot. Sky looked normal, nothing missing, nothing moving. But now, Every time I look up, I don't just see the stars, I keep expecting to notice one section where they aren't there anymore and realize it's already moving again. Quietly right over me, like I first noticed it because it stayed in the same spot no matter how fast we were going. My name's Colin. I work as a conductor on a freight line that runs overnight through long stretches of open countryside. Most of the job is routine, monitoring systems, checking signals, logging times. You get used to the rhythm of it. That night, we were about 40 minutes into a run, heading north through a wide, empty section of track. No towns nearby, just fields and occasional tree lines breaking up the horizon. It was clear out, no clouds, good visibility. I was in the cab with Martin, the driver. He was focused on the track ahead, and I was off to the side, checking logs and glancing out every so often. That's when I saw the light, off to the right of the train, far out across the fields. At first I assumed it was a farmhouse or a distant vehicle. It was a steady white light, not flashing, not moving in any obvious way. I didn't think much of it. Went back to what I was doing. A few minutes later, I looked up again. The light was still there. Same position, same distance. That caught my attention. Because we'd been moving at a steady speed, around 60 miles per hour, anything stationary should have shifted behind us by then. But it hadn't. It was still off to the right. Same angle, same height. I leaned forward a bit, trying to get a better look through the side window. "Martin," I said, nodding toward it. "You see that?" He glanced over quickly, then back to the track. "Yeah," he said. "Probably a tower or something." I nodded, but it didn't sit right. We kept moving. Another 5 minutes passed. The light didn't change, didn't drift behind us, didn't get closer. It just stayed there, like it was matching our speed perfectly. I checked the ground between us, and fields, mostly flat. Nothing that would explain a fixed light at that height. No structures tall enough. No roads running parallel. I stood up slightly, leaning closer to the window, trying to judge the distance. It was hard to tell. There was no clear reference point, but it felt far, far enough that if it were moving, you'd expect some variation. There wasn't any. I sat back down slowly, kept watching it out of the corner of my eye. The hum of the train filled the cab. Steady, familiar. Then I noticed something else, the radio. It had gone quiet, not completely off, just no chatter, no static, nothing. I reached over and adjusted the volume, no change. It was on, just silent. I looked at Martin. "You getting anything on the radio?" He shook his head slightly, eyes still forward. "Probably a dead zone." That made sense. There were stretches out here where reception dropped, but usually there'd still be some static, some noise. This was just empty. I looked back out the window. The light was still there, unchanged. I felt a slight pressure in my ears, like we'd gone through a change in elevation. But the track was flat. I swallowed. It didn't clear right away. I shifted in my seat, tried to ignore it. 10 minutes passed, then 20. The light stayed with us the entire time, never gaining, never falling behind, just pacing us, perfectly. At one point, I timed it, picked a fence post as a reference, watched how long it took to pass, then checked the light against the horizon. No change. It held its position exactly. I started to feel uneasy, not scared, just unsettled, because it didn't behave like anything I could explain. I leaned toward Martin again. "That thing's still there," he nodded once. "Yeah," he didn't sound concerned, just acknowledging it. That made it worse somehow, like we were both seeing it, but neither of us knew what to do with it. I kept watching. The light didn't flicker, didn't change brightness, just a steady, pale white. No color shift, no pulsing. I raised my hand slightly, lining it up with the window, trying to gauge if it was at a consistent height. It was, exactly the same, like it was fixed in place relative to us. The pressure in my ears came back, stronger this time. I pressed my tongue to the roof of my mouth, trying to relieve it. Didn't help much. The silence from the radio continued. The only sound was the train itself. Then, after what felt like almost an hour, something changed. The light moved. Not gradually, not in a way I could track. It just shifted. One moment it was off to the right, the next it was slightly ahead. Same distance, same height, just repositioned. I felt my chest tighten. I leaned forward again, trying to make sense of it. Martin noticed too. "You see that?" he said. "Yeah," I replied. We both watched it. Now it was ahead of us, still matching speed, still not getting closer, just sitting there in front, off to the side. The pressure in my ears peaked then, sharp enough that I winced. Then, just as quickly it eased. The radio crackled back to life, static first, then a burst of voices, normal chatter, like nothing had happened. I glanced at it, then back at the light. It was still there, for a few more seconds. Then it dimmed, not faded, just reduced, like someone had turned it down slightly, and then it was gone. No movement, no upward or downward shift, just gone. The horizon looked normal again. Dark fields, tree lines, nothing out of place. I sat back in my seat slowly. The pressure in my ears was gone. The radio sounded normal, everything felt like it had snapped back into place. I checked the time. It didn't match what I expected. We'd covered more distance than the clock suggested we should have in that span. I didn't say anything about it. Neither did Martin. We just kept going. Finished the run, logged everything as usual. But the part that sticks with me isn't just how long it stayed with us, it's how precise it was. How it held that exact distance for nearly an hour, and how, when it moved, it didn't travel, it just changed position, like it hadn't been following us at all, but had been choosing where to be the entire time. I noticed it before I even rounded the bend. My name's Nate. I was driving back from a friend's place out in the hills, taking one of those narrow forest roads that cuts through for miles without any proper lighting. It was late, close to midnight, and there hadn't been another car for a while. My headlights were the only real light out there. Tall trees on both sides, packed close together, branches stretching overhead so it almost felt like a tunnel in places. I was going slow, maybe 30, not in a rush, just trying to stay alert. That's when I saw the glow, not directly in front of me, further ahead, maybe 100 yards or so down the road around a slight curve. The trees in that area were lit up, soft white light, even, not harsh like headlights, not yellow like streetlights, just pale. It didn't look like it was coming from the road, more like it was filling the space between the trees. I slowed down instinctively, took my foot off the gas. The glow stayed where it was, didn't flicker, didn't move, just sat there, lighting up that section of forest. My first thought was another car. Maybe someone had pulled over with their lights on, but the angle didn't make sense. There was no beam cutting across the road, no shadows shifting as I moved. The light didn't react to my approach at all. I tapped the brakes lightly. The car slowed to a crawl. I leaned forward a bit, out squinting through the windshield, trying to see a source. There wasn't one. No headlights, no flashlight, nothing. Just the trees ahead glowing softly. I checked my mirrors out of habit. Empty road behind me, dark, no lights anywhere. I looked forward again. The glow was still there, same distance, same intensity. I let the car roll forward slowly. The trees on either side of me stayed dark. Only that section ahead was lit. I felt that pressure in my ears then. Subtle, like the air had shifted slightly. I swallowed. It didn't go away completely. I eased off the brake and let the car move a little faster. The glow didn't get brighter, didn't get closer in the way I expected. It just stayed ahead, like it was fixed to that part of the road. I remember gripping the wheel a little tighter, trying to tell myself it had to be something simple. Maybe someone camping, maybe some kind of equipment. But the light didn't behave like anything I'd seen before. It didn't cast strong shadows, it didn't highlight anything specific. It just made everything in that area visible. Even the ground between the trees had that same even brightness. I reached for the radio, turned it on, just to break the silence. It came on for a second, then cut to static, low, steady noise. Not loud, but constant. I turned the knob, no change, same static. I glanced down at the dash, everything else looked normal. Speedometer steady, fuel gauge fine. I looked back up. The glow was still there, closer now, maybe 50 yards ahead. I could see more detail in the trees. The bark looked flat, like it wasn't reflecting light properly. More like it was being filled in. That's the best way I can describe it. Like the light wasn't hitting the trees from outside, it was just there. Part of the scene. I slowed down even more, almost stopped. The car crept forward. The glow didn't react. I expected it to shift as I got closer, to move further down the road or to reveal whatever was causing it. But it didn't. It stayed exactly where it was, until I got right up to it. The moment my headlights reached the first of the lit trees, the glow disappeared, instantly. No fade, no transition, just gone. The forest snapped back to normal, dark. Only my headlights lighting the road ahead. I tapped the brakes harder this time. The car stopped. I sat there for a second, staring at the spot where the glow had been. Nothing. Just trees, shadows, the same as every other stretch of road. The radio went quiet again. Music came back mid-song, like it had never cut out. I turned it off. I didn't want the distraction. I stepped out of the car. The air felt still, cooler than before. I walked a few steps forward, shined my phone light toward the trees. Everything looked normal. No sign of any light source. No equipment. No vehicle. Nothing. I stepped off the road slightly onto the edge of the forest. The ground felt solid. No warmth, no disturbance, just dirt and leaves. I turned off my phone light and stood there for a moment in the dark, listening. Nothing. No wind, no insects, just silence. I felt that pressure in my ears again. Stronger this time. I stepped back toward the car. The pressure eased slightly. I got back in and closed the door. Sat there for a few seconds, hands on the wheel, trying to decide if I should keep going or turn around. I chose to keep going, didn't want to sit there any longer. I drove forward slowly, past the spot where the glow had been. The rest of the road looked normal, dark, uneven patches of light from my headlights. Nothing unusual. I checked the time on the dashboard clock, 12:17. That didn't match what I remembered. I was pretty sure it had been closer to midnight when I first saw the glow, but I couldn't be certain. I kept driving. Didn't see the light again, no more static on the radio, no more pressure in my ears. Everything felt normal again. But the part that stays with me isn't just how the glow disappeared. It's how it stayed ahead of me the entire time, never getting closer, never revealing where it came from until the exact moment I reached it. And then it was gone, like it had only existed from a distance, and the closer I got, the less real it became. Until there was nothing left, but the same stretch of forest, as if it had never been there at all. I got there before sunrise like I always did. My name's Aaron. I worked seasonal lifeguard shifts on a quiet stretch of coast, nothing busy, mostly locals and a few early swimmers. My shift started at 5:30 a.m., which meant I was usually the first one on the sand. That morning was calm, no wind, barely any waves. The sky was still dark, just starting to lighten along the horizon. That soft gray blue you get before the sun actually comes up. I unlocked the storage box, set up the chair, and did the usual check. Radio, whistle, first aid kit. Routine stuff. I remember noticing how still the water was. Not flat like glass, but close. Just a slow, even movement. No whitecaps. No noise beyond the faint push and pull. I climbed up into the chair and sat there for a minute, letting my eyes adjust. That's when I saw it, out on the horizon. At first I thought it was a ship. There's a shipping road a few miles out, so it wasn't unusual to see something sitting low on the water. But this was different. It was brighter, not flashing like a buoy or blinking like a ship light, just a steady, pale glow. Small at that distance, but clear. I leaned forward slightly, squinting, trying to make out a shape around it. There wasn't one, just the light. I checked the position against the waterline. It wasn't sitting on the horizon like a ship would. It was slightly above it. Not by much, just enough that there was a thin strip of darker sky beneath it. I frowned, trying to figure out the perspective. Maybe it was farther out than it looked, or higher up than I thought. I grabbed the binoculars from the side of the chair. Standard issue. Nothing special. I brought them up and focused. The light snapped into clarity, and that's when it got strange. There was no structure around it, no body, no outline, just a perfectly smooth, bright surface. Not glowing outward, not casting light onto the water, just existing, like a solid object that reflected light evenly across its surface. Except there was nothing to reflect. No sun yet, no visible source. I adjusted the focus again, tried to find an edge, anything. There wasn't one. It was like looking at a blank spot in the air that had been filled in with light. I lowered the binoculars, looked at it with my eyes again. Still there, same position, same brightness. I checked the time. 5:42. The sky was getting a little lighter now, but not enough to explain it. I raised the binoculars again. Still nothing but that smooth, featureless shape. I held them steady for a while, watching, waiting for it to move. It didn't. No drift, no sway, nothing, just fixed in place. I glanced down at the water beneath it. No reflection, not even a faint shimmer. The surface of the ocean looked exactly the same as everywhere else. That didn't sit right. Even distant lights usually create something on the water. This didn't. I scanned the surrounding area. No other boats, no markers, no aircraft, just that one thing. I lowered the binoculars again, rubbed my eyes, looked back up. Still there. I felt that pressure in my ears then, subtle at first, like when the weather changes quickly. I swallowed. It didn't go away. I shifted in the chair, adjusting my position. The pressure stayed. I raised the binoculars again. The object hadn't moved, but something about it looked slightly different. Hard to pinpoint. Maybe the edges were softer, or maybe the sky around it was changing as it got lighter. I couldn't tell. I checked the shoreline behind me. Still empty. No one else had arrived yet. No one to ask if they were seeing the same thing. I looked back out. The object was still there, exactly where it had been. I kept watching it as the sky continued to brighten. Slowly, the contrast between it and the background lessened. It didn't dim. It didn't dim. The sky just caught up. I realized after a few minutes that I'd lost track of time. I checked my watch, 5:58. That didn't feel right. It should have been closer to 5:50. Maybe I just zoned out. I looked back up. The object was still there, but now it looked flatter, less defined, like it was blending into the sky. I raised the binoculars one more time. For a second, I couldn't find it. I adjusted slightly, then I saw it again, fainter now, still smooth, still featureless, but harder to separate from the background. I watched as it seemed to thin out, not moving, not rising or falling, just becoming less. The pressure in my ears eased slightly. I didn't notice when exactly it disappeared. One moment it was there, the next it wasn't. No fade, no movement, just gone. I lowered the binoculars slowly. The horizon looked normal again, just the ocean meeting the sky. A few minutes later, the sun started to break through. First light hitting the water. Everything looked the way it always did. By the time the first couple of early swimmers showed up, it felt almost normal. I thought about mentioning it, asking if they'd seen anything out there earlier, but I didn't. It felt pointless, like trying to describe something I couldn't even properly define myself. I stayed on that shift until midday. Nothing else unusual happened. The ocean stayed calm. The sky stayed clear. But every so often I'd glance back out toward that same spot, half expecting to see it again. It never came back. And the part that keeps bothering me isn't just how still it was or how it didn't reflect on the water. It's how it stayed there for so long, perfectly visible. And yet, the moment the light changed just enough, it became impossible to see, like it had never been there at all, even though I'd been looking straight at it the entire time. I noticed it before I even got out of bed. My name's Ryan. I woke up like I normally do, half asleep, rolled onto my side, glanced at the clock on the nightstand. 6:48. That didn't feel right. I usually wake up around 6:30, give or take a few minutes. My alarm was set for 7, so seeing 6:48 already threw me off. It felt like I'd slept longer than usual, but not by that much. I blinked a few times, trying to shake it off. The room felt off too. Not colder exactly, just a kind of stillness that didn't match the morning. I reached over and grabbed my phone, checked the time. 6:35. I frowned, looked back at the clock. 6:48. I sat up a little, more awake now. Checked my phone again. Same as before. I unlocked it just to make sure it hadn't frozen or something. Everything looked normal. Wi-Fi connections coming through. Time updating. I looked back at the clock. 6:49 now. Still 13 minutes ahead. I stared at it for a second, trying to figure out how that could happen. It was a basic digital alarm clock. Nothing fancy. Plugged into the wall. No battery backup. It shouldn't drift like that. And even if it did, 13 minutes is a weird amount. I leaned over and pressed one of the buttons, like maybe I'd accidentally set it wrong. Nothing changed. It kept ticking forward normally. I got out of bed and went into the hallway. There's another clock in the kitchen, wall-mounted analog. I checked it, 6:36. I went into the living room, the TV display, back to my phone. Everything matched, except the one in my bedroom. I went back in and stood there looking at it. It felt deliberate. That's the only way I can put it. Like it hadn't drifted, like it had been set that way. But I hadn't touched it. Not the night before, not recently. I tried to remember the last time I'd even adjusted it. Nothing came to mind. I unplugged it from the wall. The numbers blinked and went out. Plugged it back in. It reset to 12. I waited a few seconds. Then it started counting up. 12:01, 12:02. I set it manually to match the correct time, 6:37. Stepped back, watched it for a bit. It ticked forward normally. No jumping, no weird behavior. I left it like that and went to get ready, but something stuck with me. That feeling from when I first woke up, that the room wasn't right. I brushed it off at first, made coffee, checked emails, normal morning stuff, but I kept glancing at my phone, making sure the time wasn't shifting. Everything stayed consistent. Around 7:10, I went back into the bedroom. The clock read 7:23, still 13 minutes ahead. I stopped in the doorway, just stared at it. I was sure I'd set it correctly. I even checked it twice before leaving the room earlier. But now it was off again. Same amount. Exactly 13 minutes. I walked over slowly, looked at the buttons, nothing pressed, no sign anything had changed. I unplugged it again, plugged it back in, reset it, watched it tick forward. This time I stayed there. Didn't leave the room, didn't look away. It matched my phone, second by second, perfect. I waited 5 minutes, still matched, 10 minutes, still matched. Then, right around the 12-minute mark, I felt it, that pressure in my ears again, like a quick shift in air. I swallowed. It didn't clear right away. I glanced at my phone, 7:24, looked back at the clock, 7:37. It had jumped, not gradually, not ticking faster, just ahead. Same 13 minutes. I felt a tightness in my chest then. Not panic, just confusion. Deep, heavy confusion. I checked the phone again, still 7:24, no change. I looked back at the clock, 7:37. Holding steady, I stepped back, looked around the room. Everything else was normal. Nothing out of place, no sounds, no movement, just that one thing. I unplugged it again. This time I left it unplugged, carried it into the kitchen, set it on the counter, just to get it out of the room. I didn't plug it back in. I didn't want to see it change again. The rest of the day felt normal. Work, calls, nothing unusual. But I kept thinking about that moment, that exact point where it shifted, the pressure in my ears, the timing of it. That night, before bed, I went back into the kitchen. The clock was still sitting there, blank, unplugged. I stared at it for a bit. Then I plugged it back in, 12. Started counting up. I set it to match the correct time again. Watched it for a minute. Nothing happened. I left it there. Didn't bring it back into the bedroom. I used my phone as an alarm instead. Slept fine. Woke up normally. Checked the kitchen. The clock was off again. Same 13 minutes. I didn't touch it after that. I left it unplugged. It's still sitting in the drawer now. But the part that keeps bothering me isn't just that it was wrong. It's how precise it was. How it stayed exactly 13 minutes ahead every time, and how it only changed when I was right there watching it, like whatever was affecting it needed me to be in the room to happen at all. I woke up because of the sound, not the light. It was a faint rattling, steady enough that it didn't feel like wind, more like something lightly tapping or vibrating against the fabric. My name's Jamie. I was camping alone near a small lake up in the hills, nothing remote enough to be dangerous, but far enough that once it gets dark, you don't see or hear anyone else. I'd set up just off the shoreline, maybe 20 feet back under a few trees. It had been calm all evening. No wind, no bugs, just that still kind of quiet you get near water at night. I remember falling asleep without any trouble, then waking up suddenly. The sound was right next to me, close enough that I thought something might be brushing against the tent. I stayed still for a second, listening. It was coming from multiple points, not one spot. A soft, fast vibration, like something gently shaking metal. I shifted slightly and reached toward the nearest zipper, the one on the door flap. I didn't touch it right away. I just watched. The zipper pull was moving, not swinging, not swaying, vibrating. A small, rapid motion back and forth, just enough to make a faint metallic buzz. I sat up slowly. The other zippers were doing the same thing. The vents near the top, the side openings, even the one on the small storage flap inside, they were all trembling lightly. Not in sync, but close, like they were responding to the same thing. I held my breath, trying to listen past the sound. No wind. The fabric of the tent wasn't moving. The poles were steady. Just the zippers. I reached out and touched one. It was vibrating under my fingers, a steady, fine movement. Not random, not irregular. I let go and pulled my hand back. The sound didn't stop. It didn't change at all. I checked my phone. 2:11 a.m., no signal as expected, battery at about 40%. I sat there for a moment, trying to decide what to do. Part of me thought it might be some kind of insect thing, or maybe something in the ground causing a vibration. But it didn't feel like it was coming from below. It felt closer, like it was in the air. I unzipped the door slowly. The zipper I was pulling didn't vibrate the same way as the others while I was moving it, but as soon as I stopped, it joined the rest again. That stuck with me. I pushed the flap open just enough to look outside. The air felt colder than it had when I went to sleep. Not dramatically, but enough that it hit me immediately. The lake was still, completely still. No ripples, no sound of water at all. That wasn't normal. Even on calm nights, there's usually some movement. I leaned forward slightly and looked out over the surface. That's when I saw the light. It was hovering above the lake, not far out, maybe 30 or 40 feet from the shoreline. A dim, pale glow. Not bright enough to reflect strongly on the water, but visible, clearly separate from everything else. It didn't move, didn't flicker, just stayed there. I stepped out of the tent slowly. The ground was cold under my feet through my boots. The sound of the zippers continued behind me. I turned my head slightly. They were still vibrating, even with the flap open, even with the air inside and outside connected. I looked back at the lake. The light was still there, same position, same height above the water, maybe 6 or 7 feet up. Hard to judge in the dark. I took a few steps forward. The grass barely made any sound under my boots. Everything felt muted, like the sound wasn't carrying properly. The light didn't react, it just stayed there. I stopped about 10 feet from the water's edge, close enough to see the outline of the shoreline clearly. The lake surface looked wrong, not frozen, but too smooth, like glass. The light hovered above it without casting a clear reflection. There was a faint glow beneath it, but it didn't spread or ripple the way you'd expect. It was contained. I swallowed, my ears popping slightly. That same pressure again, stronger this time. I shifted my weight, trying to ignore it. The light moved then, not toward me, not away from me. Just sideways along the surface of the lake, following the shoreline, smooth, steady. No change in height, no change in brightness. I turned my body to keep it in view. It traveled like that for a few seconds. Then it angled slightly upward, climbing just enough to clear the far edge of the lake, and then it kept going. Toward the low hills beyond. I watched it rise. Not quickly, not slowly, just a constant motion. No sound, no disturbance. It passed over the tree line on the far side. For a second, I could still see it between the branches. Then it disappeared behind the hill. Gone. I stood there, staring at where it had been. The silence lingered for a moment longer. Then the normal sounds came back. The faint movement of water, a light breeze through the trees. Behind me, the zippers stopped, all at once, no gradual fade, just still. I turned back toward the tent. Everything looked normal again. The fabric was still. The zippers hung in place, unmoving. I walked back slowly and stepped inside. Sat there for a while, listening. Nothing unusual, just the usual quiet of the night. I checked my phone again, 2:14. It didn't feel like 3 minutes. I lay back down eventually, but I didn't fall asleep for a long time. Every so often, I'd glance at the zippers, expecting them to start again. They didn't. In the morning, everything looked normal. The lake had small ripples again. The air felt warmer, no sign of anything unusual. But the part I keep thinking about isn't just the light over the water. It's how the zippers reacted. How they started before I even saw anything outside, and stopped the moment the light disappeared. Like whatever passed over the lake was close enough to affect everything around me, even inside the tent, but quiet enough that the only thing I noticed was the smallest movement in something that shouldn't have been moving at all. I first saw it in the reflection before I saw it directly. My name's Kieran. I was driving home late, maybe around 11:50 p.m., cutting through a long stretch of rural road that runs along farmland and low drainage ditches. It had been raining steady for about an hour, not heavy, just that constant, fine rain that makes everything shine. The road was empty. No cars ahead, none behind me. Just the sound of tires moving over wet asphalt and the wipers going back and forth at a steady pace. I wasn't thinking about anything in particular, just focused on the road, when I noticed something off in the passenger side mirror. A glow. At first I thought it was a car behind me, maybe coming up fast. But when I looked at the mirror again, the light wasn't positioned right. It wasn't centered in the lane. It was off to the side. Lower. Closer. I turned my head slightly and glanced out the passenger window. That's when I saw it. A bright orb, about the size of a basketball, maybe a little bigger, hovering just outside the car, level with the window. It was maybe 3 or 4 feet away from the door, close enough that I could see it clearly even through the rain. It wasn't casting a beam like headlights. It was just there. A solid, glowing sphere, white but not harsh, soft-edged. The rain hit it and seemed to vanish against it. No splashes, no distortion, like the drops just stopped existing when they touched it. I gripped the wheel tighter and slowed down without meaning to. The orb kept pace, perfectly. Same speed, same distance from the car. I glanced at the speedometer, 45. The orb stayed exactly beside me. Not drifting, not adjusting, just matching me. I looked back at the road, then back at it. Still there. I rolled my shoulders slightly, trying to steady myself. This didn't make sense. If it was something physical, it should have been affected by the rain or the wind from the car moving, but it wasn't. It looked completely unaffected. I cracked the window open just a fraction. The sound of rain got louder immediately, but there was nothing else, no hum, no electrical noise, nothing. I closed it again. The orb didn't react, it just stayed there. I drove like that for maybe 5 seconds, maybe 10. It felt longer. I kept expecting it to drift away or for something to change. Nothing did. Then I noticed something else. It wasn't reflecting on the road. The asphalt was wet, reflective, catching the glow of my headlights and the faint ambient light from the sky. But the orb didn't show up in it. No reflection, no glow beneath it. It was like it wasn't interacting with the surface at all. I swallowed, my ears popping slightly. Same kind of pressure change I'd felt before, but sharper this time. I tried to ignore it, focused on driving. The road ahead curved slightly to the right. I followed it. The orb stayed exactly where it was relative to the car. It didn't lag behind on the turn. It didn't cut ahead. It just adjusted perfectly, like it was locked to my position. I took my foot off the accelerator a little. The car slowed. The orb slowed. No delay, no correction, just matched instantly. I remember thinking I should speed up or stop, but I didn't do either. I just kept going. Part of me didn't want to break whatever was happening. Then, without any warning, the orb shifted. Not gradually, not smoothly like before. It moved upward, straight up. It didn't accelerate in a way I could track. It was just there beside the window, and then it was above the car. Gone from my peripheral vision in less than a second. I instinctively looked up through the windshield. The rain streaked across the glass, making it hard to see clearly. But for a split second, I caught a glimpse of it, higher now, above the road, still glowing the same way. Then it shot upward again, faster this time. A straight vertical line. No arc, no curve, just gone into the dark sky. I slowed the car almost to a stop, heart pounding harder than it should have been. I pulled over onto the shoulder, tires crunching on gravel. Sat there for a second, staring out through the windshield. The rain kept falling. The road looked exactly the same, empty, wet, quiet. I turned my head, scanning the sky through the side window. Nothing, no fading light, no distant glow, just darkness. I checked the mirrors, nothing behind me, no headlights, no sign of another car. I sat there for maybe a minute, trying to calm down, trying to make sense of it. Then I noticed something else. The rain. It sounded normal again. I hadn't realized it before, but while the orb had been there, the sound of the rain hitting the car had felt muted, like it was being dampened somehow. Now it was back to its usual steady pattern. I put the car back in gear and started driving again, slower this time, watching the passenger side more than I should have. Nothing else appeared. The rest of the drive was completely normal. When I got home, I sat in the driveway for a while before going inside. The engine ticking as it cooled, the rain still falling, everything ordinary again. But the part that sticks with me isn't just how close it was, it's how perfectly it matched my speed. How it stayed in that exact position like it was fixed there. And how when it left, it didn't drift or fade. It just went straight up like it had been moving with me for a reason. And the moment it was done, it didn't need to stay any longer, just gone. Without a sound, without disturbing anything around it, like it had never been part of the same space to begin with. I noticed it in the water before I noticed anything else. My name's Callum. I'd gone down to the lake just after sunset, planning to fish for a couple hours before heading back. It's a small place outside town, not a big public spot. Just a narrow dock, a few benches, and a gravel pull-in for cars. By the time I got there, it was already quiet. One other car in the lot, but I didn't see anyone around. The sky was clear, just a few faint clouds way off in the distance. No wind. The water was mostly still, just small ripples moving out from the shoreline. I set up near the end of the dock, dropped a line, and sat there for a bit, doing nothing. It was one of those evenings where everything feels kind of flat and calm. No bugs yet, no birds, just the sound of the water moving lightly against the wood. I'd been there maybe 15 minutes when I saw something shift across the surface. At first I thought it was just a ripple catching the light, but it wasn't moving like the rest of the water. The reflection slid across it, smooth, too smooth. It wasn't tied to the movement of the surface. It looked like a band of faint light drifting from left to right. I leaned forward, trying to get a better angle. The reflection stayed visible. It wasn't bright, just a soft, pale glow stretched thin across the water like a reflection from something above. I instinctively looked up. There was nothing there. Just sky. Dark blue, fading toward black. A few stars starting to show. No plane, no drone, no visible light source. I looked back down. The reflection was still moving. Same direction, same steady speed. I stood up and stepped closer to the edge of the dock. The boards creaked under my weight, but otherwise everything stayed quiet. The glow passed under the dock slightly, breaking apart where the supports hit the water, then reforming on the other side. That's when it clicked that it wasn't something in the water. It was definitely coming from above, but there was nothing above. I turned slowly, scanning the sky again. Nothing. Nothing. No flicker. No movement. Just empty space. I checked behind me too, thinking maybe it was something reflecting from the shoreline. But there weren't any lights on, no houses nearby, no cars with headlights. Everything was dark. I went back to the edge and followed the reflection with my eyes. It kept moving, crossing the water at a steady pace, not speeding up, not slowing down, just passing through like it had somewhere to be. I remember feeling this weird hesitation, like I didn't want to look away from it in case I missed something. But I kept glancing up anyway. Every time I did, the sky was empty. The reflection reached the far side of the visible water, then it faded, not abruptly, just thinning out until it wasn't there anymore. I stayed standing for a minute, staring at where it had been. The water returned to normal, just dark ripples and faint reflections from the sky. I sat back down slowly, tried to brush it off. Could have been something passing overhead that I just couldn't see, but that didn't sit right. If something was bright enough to reflect like that, I should have seen it. At least a shape, a movement, something. I picked up my line, reeled it in a bit, then cast it again. Tried to get back into it. A few minutes passed, nothing happened, the lake stayed still. I started to relax again. Then it happened a second time. Same kind of reflection, this time coming from the opposite direction. I noticed it earlier, before it got close. The same faint glow sliding across the surface. I stood up again immediately, watched it carefully this time, tracked it with my eyes, then looked up quickly, trying to catch whatever was causing it. Nothing. I moved my head side to side, changing my angle. Still nothing. The sky was clear, stars visible, no obstruction, no outline. I looked back down. The reflection had reached closer to the dock now. It passed under it again, breaking apart slightly, then continuing on, exactly like before. I felt this pressure in my ears then, subtle but noticeable, like the air had shifted. I swallowed, tried to clear it, didn't fully go away. I stayed focused on the water. The reflection slowed this time, not by much, just enough to notice. It lingered near the dock for a second, almost like it was pausing. Then it continued on, moving past and fading again toward the far side. I didn't sit back down this time. I stayed standing, looking up more frequently now, trying to catch even the slightest hint of something. But there was nothing. No sound either. No hum. No distant engine. Just silence. The kind that feels heavier when you notice it. I checked my phone for the time. 8:47. I don't know how long I'd been watching. It didn't feel like long. I turned slowly, scanning the whole area, the shoreline, the trees, the parking lot behind me. Still no sign of anyone else. The other car was still there, but I hadn't heard any movement. No footsteps, no doors, nothing. I looked back at the water. Part of me expected the reflection to come back a third time. It didn't. The surface stayed normal. The ripples moved the way they should. The reflections matched the sky again. I packed up earlier than I planned, didn't feel like staying out there any longer. As I walked back toward the parking lot, I glanced over my shoulder once more. The lake looked completely normal. Dark. Still. Empty. But the part I keep thinking about isn't just the reflection itself, it's how consistent it was, how it moved across the water like something solid was passing overhead, and how no matter how many times I looked up, there was never anything there, just an empty sky, like whatever caused it was only visible in the reflection and nowhere else. I first noticed it because the monitors all glitched at the same time. My name's Luis. I worked night shift cleaning a mid-sized office building, 4 floors mostly empty after 8 p.m. My shift ran from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. and most nights were the same. Quiet, repetitive, just me, a cart, and whatever noise the building made on its own. The security desk sat near the front entrance with a bank of screens showing different camera angles. I wasn't security, but I'd pass by it a lot during the night, and sometimes I'd stop there for a minute just to sit. The first time it happened, I didn't think anything of it. All the screens flickered, not individually, together, like someone had hit a switch. They didn't go completely black right away. It was more like a brief distortion, like the image warped for a split second, then cut out. Every screen went dark, no signal. I remember looking at the clock on the wall. 2:17 a.m. I stood there, waiting for them to come back. They did. About half a minute later, all the feeds snapped back at once. No reboot screen, no delay between cameras, just instantly back to normal. I shrugged it off, figured it was some kind of system hiccup, maybe scheduled maintenance or a power thing. But the next week, it happened again. Same thing. I was mopping the second floor hallway when the overhead lights dimmed slightly. Not enough to go out, just enough to notice, and then came back. I didn't connect it right away, but when I walked past the security desk a minute later, I checked the clock. 2:17 a.m. I stopped, stared at the monitors. Everything looked fine, but something about it bothered me. The timing. It felt too exact. So the next week I paid attention. Around 2:15 I made sure I was near the front. I sat at the security desk watching the screens. The building was completely quiet. No footsteps. No elevators moving. Nothing. The minute hand ticked forward. 2:16, then 2:17. Right on the second, the screens distorted again. That same brief ripple across every feed. Then, black. All of them. No signal. The lights above me dimmed slightly again. Just like before, I checked my phone timer. I started counting. At around 30 seconds, the screens came back, exactly like the first time. No variation, no delay. I leaned back in the chair, trying to process it. It wasn't random, it wasn't occasional, it was consistent. Same time, same duration, every week. I asked one of the day guys about it later. He didn't know anything. Said the system logs didn't show outages. No recorded downtime, that didn't make sense. If the cameras went out, it should have been logged. But there was nothing. The next week, I decided to walk the building during the blackout, see if anything else changed. At 2:16, I was already on the top floor. There's a section up there with skylights, long panels running across part of the ceiling. During the day, it lets in a lot of natural light. At night, you just see darkness above them. I stood beneath them, waiting. 2:17. The lights dimmed again, just slightly. Then everything went quiet in a way that didn't feel normal. Not silence exactly, just absence. The faint hum of the building systems dropped off. I looked up at the skylights. At first, I didn't see anything, just the usual dark. Then something moved, a faint light, very dim. It drifted across the glass, slow, not like a plane, not like anything I'd seen before. It didn't blink, didn't change brightness. It just moved, like it was passing over the building. But there was no sound, no engine noise, no wind, nothing. I stepped closer, squinting. The shape wasn't clear, just a glow, soft-edged. I tried to track its movement. It didn't follow a straight line exactly. It kind of drifted, smooth, but not rigid. I checked my phone timer again. 20 seconds had passed. The light continued across the skylight panels. It didn't cast any real illumination into the room, just a faint suggestion of brightness through the glass, like it was above the clouds or behind something. But that didn't make sense either. There were no clouds that night. I'd checked earlier when I stepped outside for a break. Clear sky. The glow reached the far edge of the skylights, then slowed, just slightly, like it hesitated. I felt that pressure in my ears again, like a subtle shift, not painful, just noticeable. I swallowed, tried to clear it, didn't fully go away. The light lingered at the edge for a second, then moved out of view. Gone. Right as it disappeared, the building sound came back, the hum, the faint buzz of the lights, and a second later, everything brightened back to normal. I checked the time, 2:17, turning to 2:18, 30 seconds. I stood there for a while, staring up at the skylights. Nothing else passed over, no more light, just empty darkness. I went back down to the security desk. The monitors were all working again, every feed normal. I sat down, watching them, trying to spot anything unusual. There was nothing. No record of the blackout, no footage missing. Just a continuous stream, like nothing had happened. I checked the next week. Same time, same blackout. But I stayed at the desk that time. Watched the screens go out, waited, watched them come back, didn't go upstairs. I don't know why. Maybe I didn't want to see it again, or maybe I wanted to see if it would show up on the cameras. It didn't. After that, I started noticing smaller things. Nothing obvious, just details that didn't sit right. Once, during the blackout, I thought I heard something above the ceiling tiles. A faint clicking, moving, but when the lights came back, it stopped. Another time, I checked the time on my phone before and after. It was off by about 10 seconds. Not much, but enough to notice. The system clocks stayed consistent. Just my phone. I still work there. The blackout still happens every week, same time, same duration. And every time it gets close to 2:17, I find myself looking up, even when I'm not on that floor, even when I can't see the skylights, because I know that for those 30 seconds, something passes over the building, quiet enough that nothing records it, and precise enough that it never stays longer than it should. Like whatever it is, only needs that exact amount of time before it's gone again. I noticed the first streetlight go out just before I reached it. My name's Ryan. I was driving through a small town I don't usually pass through, cutting across on a late route home. It was one of those places where everything shuts down early. Few shops, quiet streets, not much going on after midnight. It was just after 1:30 a.m., no traffic, no pedestrians. Just long stretches of road with evenly spaced streetlights running down either side. I was driving at a steady speed, not thinking about much, when the light ahead flickered, just once. Then it went out. I didn't think anything of it at first. Bulbs go out. Happens all the time. I kept driving. Then the next one did the same. Flicker. Dark. I slowed down slightly without really meaning to. It wasn't random. The lights were going out in sequence, one after another, moving toward me. Each one stayed on until I got close enough. Then it flickered and went dark, leaving a growing stretch of road behind me in shadow. I looked in the rearview mirror. The lights behind me were still off. Not coming back on, just a line of darkness where I'd already been. I looked forward again. Another light went out. Closer now. I tightened my grip on the wheel. There was something off about it. No sound, no power surge, no visible reason. Just each light dying right as I approached it, like something was moving with me, or reacting to me. I checked the dash. Everything in the car was normal. Radio still playing quietly, engines steady, no warning lights. But the road ahead kept getting darker. Each light went out just before I reached it. Flicker, then gone. I slowed down more, around 25 now. Didn't feel right to keep going at speed. The stretch ahead looked longer than it should have. Or maybe it just felt that way because of the darkness. The next light went out, then the next. The pattern didn't change. It was precise, consistent, almost timed. I looked off to the sides, trying to see if there were any houses or movement. Nothing, just dark windows, closed shops, empty sidewalks. Then I noticed something further ahead, at the end of the stretch, past where the last few lights still remained. There was a single white light, suspended above the road, not attached to a pole, not coming from a building, just hanging there. It was faint at first, easy to miss, but as I kept driving, it became clearer. It didn't move, didn't flicker, just stayed in one place. I slowed even more. The lights between me and it kept going out, one by one, until there were only a few left. The air felt different, like it had gone still, even inside the car. The radio started to fade slightly. Not static, just quieter, like the signal was weakening. I reached for the dial, but stopped. Didn't want to take my eyes off the road. Another light went out. Now there were only 2 left before the end of the stretch. The white light ahead stayed perfectly still, no change in brightness, no movement. I tried to judge how high it was, maybe 10 or 15 feet above the road. Hard to tell without anything to compare it to. The second to last streetlight flickered, then went dark. Now there was just one left, between me and that light. I slowed almost to a stop. The last streetlight stayed on for a second, then flickered and went out. Now the only light ahead was that white one, hanging over the road. I rolled forward slowly, heart beating harder than it should have been. The radio cut out completely, no sound at all. The engine still ran, but everything else felt quiet, too quiet. I got closer. The light didn't get brighter, didn't react. It just stayed there, perfectly still. I could see more detail now. It wasn't a sharp point, more like a small, soft glow, contained, not casting light onto the road beneath it. The asphalt under it was just as dark as everything else. I kept moving, slow, careful, watching it the whole time. Then, just before I reached it, it was gone. No fade, no movement, just gone. The space where it had been was empty. I hit the brakes fully, stopped the car, sat there for a second, staring at the spot. Nothing, no light, no reflection, just darkness. The radio came back on suddenly, loud enough to make me flinch. The streetlights behind me flickered back to life, one by one, in reverse. Starting from the far end, working back toward me until the entire road was lit again. Like nothing had happened. I checked the rearview mirror. The lights were all on, normal. I looked forward again. The road ahead looked the same as before, empty, quiet, no sign of anything unusual. I sat there for a bit longer than I should have, engine idling, hands still on the wheel, trying to make sense of it. Then I drove on, slow at first, then picking up speed. The rest of the town passed like normal. Lights stayed on, radio stayed clear, no more interruptions. But the part I keep coming back to isn't just the lights going out. It's how they followed me, how they shut off exactly as I reached them, and how that one light stayed there at the end like it was waiting and disappeared at the exact moment I got close enough, leaving nothing behind, except a stretch of road that felt different while I was in it, and completely normal the second I left. I woke up because it felt like morning. Not gradually, not that slow light through the curtains, just suddenly aware that the room was brighter than it should have been. I checked my phone out of habit. 4:02 a.m. That didn't make sense. I sat up a little, still half asleep, trying to figure out what was lighting the room. My blinds were mostly closed, just tilted enough to let in a little bit of whatever was outside. The light wasn't warm. It wasn't like sunrise. It was pale, almost gray-white, flat. I stayed still for a second, listening. Nothing. No traffic outside, no voices, no wind, just that weird brightness filling the room. I swung my legs over the side of the bed and stood up. The floor felt colder than usual. Not freezing, just noticeably cooler than the rest of the apartment had been when I went to sleep. I walked over to the window and adjusted the blinds slightly. That's when I saw it. The clouds were glowing, but not from below. The sky was overcast. Low, thick clouds covering everything, but the light was coming from above them. I could tell because the underside of the clouds was darker in patches, like shadows, while the tops were lit from somewhere I couldn't see. It looked wrong. Like someone had flipped the direction of the light. I leaned closer to the glass, trying to make sense of it. Normally, if there's light at that hour, it's from streetlights or buildings, maybe a passing car. You can see it hitting the underside of the clouds, spreading upward. This wasn't like that. This was contained. The light wasn't spreading across the whole sky either. It was concentrated in a broad area directly above my building and a few blocks around it. Beyond that, the sky was darker, almost like the glow had boundaries. I unlocked the window and pushed it open slightly. No sound, no hum, nothing that would explain it. The air outside felt still, heavy, maybe. I can't describe it better than that. I stepped back and grabbed my phone from the bed, thinking I should record it. By the time I turned the camera on and got back to the window, the light had already started to fade. Not quickly, but noticeably. The brightness was dropping. The clouds were losing that glow. I held the phone up anyway, trying to capture something, but it just looked like a dim, overcast sky on the screen. Nothing like what I'd just seen. I lowered the phone and watched. The light continued to fade, slowly draining out of the clouds. The darker patches blended back in. The sky returned to that normal pre-dawn darkness. Within maybe 30 seconds, it was gone completely, like someone had turned something off. I stood there for a while, waiting to see if it would come back. It didn't. I checked the time again, 4:06. 4 minutes since I'd woken up. It felt longer than that. I closed the window and sat on the edge of the bed, still holding my phone. Everything felt normal again. The room was dark, quiet, no sign of anything unusual. I lay back down, but didn't fall asleep right away. I kept thinking about the way the light had looked, how it didn't behave like anything I'd seen before, and something else started to bother me the more I thought about it. The direction of the light. It didn't just look like it was coming from above the clouds. It felt like it was, like there was something up there, beyond the cloud cover, shining downward, but without casting light onto the ground. I got up once more and checked outside. Nothing, just the same dark sky. A few minutes later, the first signs of actual sunrise started. A faint line along the horizon, warm, gradual, spreading outward like it's supposed to, completely different from what I'd seen. I ended up getting out of bed early after that, made coffee, tried to shake it off, but all morning something felt slightly off. Not obvious, just different. Later that day, I checked the weather. Cloudy overnight, no storms, no reports of lightning or anything unusual. I even checked local news and social media just out of curiosity. Nothing. No one mentioning strange lights or anything like that. That night, I went to bed earlier than usual. I woke up once around 3:50. The room was completely dark, no glow, no strange light. Everything was normal, but I still got up and checked the window anyway, just in case. The sky looked exactly how it should. Dark, clouds barely visible, no sign of anything above them. I stood there for a minute, staring out, waiting. Nothing changed. I went back to bed. But even now, the part that sticks with me isn't just the light. It's how it felt like it was coming from somewhere that shouldn't have been visible, like something above the clouds had lit them up, without touching anything below, and then shut off, leaving everything exactly the same as before, except for those few minutes where the sky didn't behave the way it's supposed to. I noticed it because it wasn't moving. My name's Nathan. I lived on the 4th floor of an apartment block, overlooking a cluster of older buildings across a narrow stretch of road. Not a huge city, but busy enough during the day. At night, though, it got quiet, just the occasional car passing through and a few lit windows here and there. That night, I was sitting on the balcony around 11:40 p.m., just trying to cool off. It had been a warm day, and the heat kind of stuck around even after dark. I had a drink with me, phone in my pocket, nothing unusual. I was just looking out, not really focusing on anything, when something caught my eye between two buildings across the street. At first, I thought it was a light from one of the windows behind them, but it didn't line up right. It was too centered, too clean. It hovered in the gap between the buildings, maybe halfway up their height, a bright white point, not flickering, not pulsing, just steady. I leaned forward slightly, trying to get a better look. It didn't move, didn't drift, didn't shift with perspective. It just stayed in that exact spot. I checked the edges of the buildings, trying to see if it was attached to anything, a cable, a pole, something like that. Nothing. Just empty space around it. I stood up and moved a step to the left. The object didn't shift relative to the buildings. It stayed fixed in the same position between them. I moved back to where I was. Same thing. It wasn't following my movement like a reflection would. It wasn't attached to anything I could see. It just hung there. I remember thinking it might be a drone, but there was no sound. Not even a faint hum. And it wasn't blinking like drones usually do, just a constant white point. I checked my phone for the time, 11:43. I decided to watch it for a bit, see if it moved. A few minutes passed, nothing changed. It stayed perfectly still. Cars drove by below, headlights passing through the gap briefly, but the object remained visible above them, unaffected. I tried to judge the distance, hard to tell at night. It could have been closer than it looked, or further. But it felt like it was in that space between the buildings, not beyond them. The longer I watched it, the stranger it felt. Not because it did anything, but because it didn't. No drift, no adjustment, no flicker. Just there. I went back inside for a second to grab my phone properly. Thought about taking a photo. When I came back out, it was still there. Same position, same brightness. I lifted my phone, tried to zoom in. It didn't capture well. Just looked like a small, overexposed dot on the screen. No detail. I lowered the phone and watched it again. I noticed something then. The light didn't seem to be casting anything. No glow on the building edges. No reflection on the windows nearby. It existed visually, but didn't interact with anything around it. That's what made me uneasy. I checked the time again, 11:58. It had been there at least 15 minutes, maybe longer, since I didn't know when I first noticed it. I stood there just watching, waiting for something to change. Nothing did. Then I heard my neighbor's balcony door slide open. Tom, who lived next door. We talked sometimes. He stepped out, leaned on his railing, lit a cigarette. "Still up?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "Hey, can you see that?" I pointed toward the gap between the buildings. He looked where I was pointing. "See what?" "That light. Right there." He leaned forward slightly, squinting. I glanced back at it. It was still there, exactly where it had been. "Between those two buildings," said, "halfway up." Tom looked again. "I don't see anything." I turned my head back toward the gap. The light was gone, not fading, not moving away, just gone. The space between the buildings was empty, dark, normal. I blinked, stepped closer to the railing. Nothing. No trace of it. I looked around the sky, thinking maybe it had moved. Nothing there either, just the usual scattered lights from distant buildings and the faint glow from the street. "It was just there," I said, more to myself than him. Tom shrugged. "Probably a plane or something." "It wasn't moving." He didn't respond, just took a drag from his cigarette and looked out over the street. I stayed there for another few minutes, scanning the area. Nothing came back, no sign of it anywhere. I checked the time again, 12:01. I went back inside eventually, sat down for a while trying to think through what I'd seen. It didn't make sense. If it had moved, I would have seen it. If it had dimmed, I would have noticed, but it didn't do either. It just disappeared the moment I tried to show someone else. I went back out onto the balcony a few more times that night. Nothing. The gap between the buildings looked completely normal. Same shadows, same empty space. But the part that stuck with me wasn't just how long it stayed there. It was how perfectly still it was the entire time, like it wasn't affected by anything around it. And how the moment I tried to confirm it with someone else, it wasn't there anymore. As if it had only been there while I was the only one looking at it. I noticed my dog stop before I heard the others. His name's Bruno, big mixed breed, not the type to get spooked easily. We were on our usual late walk, just after midnight. I live in a quiet neighborhood, rows of houses, small yards, nothing out of the ordinary. It was one of those still nights, no wind. Cloud cover, but thin enough that you could still see lighter patches where the sky was trying to show through. Street lights were on, everything normal. Bruno had been walking a little ahead of me, nose down, doing his usual thing. Then he just stopped. Not slowed, stopped. His body went stiff. I thought he'd seen a cat or something. I gave the leash a light tug. He didn't move. Didn't even look at me. He was staring upward. That's when the barking started. Not just one dog, all of them at once. It spread fast, like a chain reaction. One house, then the next, then the next. Within seconds, it sounded like every dog on the street was barking. Not normal barking either. Not excited, not territorial. It sounded sharp, focused, like they were all reacting to the same thing. Bruno still hadn't moved. His ears were pinned slightly back, but not in fear. More like alert, locked in. I followed his gaze. At first, I didn't see anything. Just clouds, soft, uneven patches drifting slowly, the streetlight glow bouncing off them. Then I noticed a section that looked different. Not brighter, just clearer. A faint shape moving behind the clouds. I squinted, trying to focus. It wasn't solid, more like a distortion, a pale glow barely visible, sliding through the cloud layer. It didn't flash, didn't blink, just moved, slow and steady, and completely silent. The barking got louder, more intense. Some dogs started whining between barks. Bruno let out a low growl, still staring up, not moving an inch. The glow shifted slightly, not like it was changing direction, more like it was adjusting its angle. And that's when I realized something didn't match. The clouds were moving one way, slow, drifting left, but the glow was moving another, cutting across them, ignoring the direction of the wind. I felt that pressure in my ears then. Sudden, sharp, like a quick altitude change. I swallowed. It didn't go away. The air felt heavier, harder to breathe normally. I looked back down at Bruno. His whole body was tense now, tail stiff. Eyes locked on that same point in the sky. I followed his gaze again. The glow had gotten slightly brighter, still faint, but clearer now. A soft, pale light moving through the clouds. It wasn't illuminating them. If anything, it looked like it was pushing the light out of the way, leaving a slightly darker outline around itself. I took a step back without thinking. Bruno didn't follow. The leash pulled tight. He resisted, didn't break his stare. The barking reached its peak. Every dog on the block going at once. Then just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. All of it, at the exact same moment. Silence dropped over the street. Heavy, complete. Bruno's growl stopped too, but he didn't relax. Still staring, still frozen. I looked up again. The glow had slowed, almost hovering now, barely moving, just sitting there behind the clouds. I tried to track its position against something fixed, a rooftop, a tree, but it didn't line up right. Like it wasn't at a distance I could judge. The pressure in my ears built again, stronger this time. Enough that I winced slightly. My head felt tight. I raised a hand instinctively, pressing it against my ear. And in that moment, the glow shifted. Not gradually, not smoothly. It just slid, a short distance across the clouds, too fast for how slow it had been moving before. Then it stopped again, dead still. The silence held. No dogs, no wind, nothing. I realized I was holding my breath. I let it out slowly, tried to steady myself. Bruno's stance changed slightly, not relaxed, but less rigid. His ears tilted forward instead of back, like he was trying to listen. I listened too. There was a faint sound, hard to place. Not quite a hum, not quite static, more like something vibrating just out of hearing range. I felt it more than heard it. In my chest, in my jaw. The glow dimmed slightly, then brightened again. Not a pulse. More like a shift. Then, without any transition, it was gone. No fade, no movement, just gone. The clouds looked normal again. Same soft, uneven shapes, drifting slowly. The pressure in my ears released instantly. The faint vibrations stopped. And a second later, the dogs started barking again. But this time it was normal, scattered, uncoordinated, like they were reacting to each other instead of something above. Bruno finally moved, lowered his head, looked around, then back at me, confused, like he didn't understand what had just happened. I gave the leash a gentle pull. He followed this time, still glancing up every few steps. We finished the walk quickly after that. I kept looking at the sky. Nothing else showed up. Everything stayed normal. But the part that sticks with me isn't just the light. It's how every dog reacted at once, before I even saw anything. And how Bruno didn't just look at the sky. He locked onto a specific point, like he knew exactly where it was, even when I couldn't see it at all. I noticed it because it didn't line up with anything. My name's Aaron. I work overnight security at a distribution warehouse just outside a small industrial park. The lot's huge, rows of trailers, loading bays, and floodlights mounted high up on poles that keep everything bright all night. There aren't many places for anything to hide out there. Most nights are the same. Walk the perimeter, sit in the office, check the cameras, repeat. That night started normal. Dry air, clear sky, no wind. One of those quiet nights where even the hum of the lights feels louder than usual. I was about halfway through my second round, cutting across the open section of the lot between two rows of parked trailers. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was just a shadow, but it didn't make sense. It was darker than anything else around it. Not just shaded, like actual absence of light. And it wasn't attached to anything. No pole, no vehicle, no structure casting it. It was just there. A patch of darkness, maybe 10 feet across, sitting on the asphalt. I stopped walking, stared at it, tried to figure out what angle could be causing it. The floodlights were fixed. No movement, no flickering. Every other shadow in the lot made sense. This one didn't. Then it moved, slowly. Not drifting like a cloud shadow, not stretching like a normal shadow. It slid, across the ground, perfectly smooth. Like something was pushing it from underneath. I felt that weird drop in my stomach. Not panic, just something telling me this wasn't right. I took a step closer. The darkness didn't react. It kept moving at the same slow pace. I looked up, checking the lights above. All of them were steady, bright, nothing blocking them. I turned in a slow circle, trying to line up where the shadow could be coming from. There was nothing, no angle that matched. When I looked back down, it had moved a few feet further across the lot. Still smooth, still silent. I followed it, keeping a bit of distance. It didn't speed up, didn't slow down, just kept sliding along the asphalt. The closer I got, the more wrong it looked. Edges too sharp, too defined. And the darkness itself looked deeper than it should have been, like looking into something instead of at it. I crouched slightly, trying to see if it changed from a lower angle. It didn't. Still flat, still there. Still moving. I pulled out my radio, thinking about calling it in, but stopped. What was I going to say? There's a shadow moving across the lot. I hesitated, then pulled out my phone instead. Opened then the camera, pointed it at the ground. The screen showed the lot, the lights, the asphalt, but no dark patch. I lowered the phone, looked directly at it. Still there, clear as anything. I raised the phone again. Nothing. Just empty pavement. I felt that pressure in my ears then. Subtle, but noticeable, like the air had shifted. I swallowed. It didn't go away. I stepped closer, close enough now that I could see the edge of it clearly. There was no gradient, no soft transition like a normal shadow. It went from lit asphalt to full darkness instantly. I extended my foot slightly, not touching it yet, just close. I don't know why I did it. Curiosity, I guess. Or maybe I expected something to happen before I actually made contact. Nothing did, so I stepped into it. The moment my boot crossed the edge, something felt off. Not physically. The ground felt the same, but the temperature dropped, just around my foot. Cold, not freezing, just noticeably colder than the air around it. I pulled my foot back. The cold went with it for a second, then disappeared. I stared at the patch again. It hadn't changed. Still moving. Still sliding across the lot. I followed it a bit further. It was heading toward the far fence line now, away from the main building. Away from the brightest lights. I glanced up at the cameras mounted on the poles. There were at least 3 covering this section, all pointed directly at where we were. I started walking faster, trying to keep up. The patch didn't react, just kept moving at that same slow pace. As it reached the edge of the brightest area, something shifted. Not the darkness itself, the lights. One of the floodlights dimmed slightly, just for a second, then returned to normal. The patch didn't flicker, didn't change, but the moment felt connected. The pressure in my ears increased, stronger now, enough that I winced slightly. The air felt heavier, harder to breathe normally. I stopped walking. The patch kept moving, slid right up to the fence line, then, without slowing it, passed through it. Not under, not around. Through. The metal bars didn't block it, didn't affect it at all. It just continued onto the other side, across the gravel beyond the lot. And then it was gone, not fading, not shrinking, just gone, like it had reached some invisible boundary. The pressure in my ears released instantly. The air felt normal again. The light stayed steady. I stood there for a while, looking at the fence, half expecting it to come back. It didn't. I went back inside after that, sat down in the office, pulled up the camera feeds, scrolled back to where it had happened. The footage showed me walking across the lot, stopping, moving, following something. But there was nothing there. No dark patch, no shadow, just me, walking around like I was tracking something invisible. I watched it a few times, trying to see if there was any glitch, any flicker. There wasn't. Everything looked normal, except me. I finished my shift without going back out there. Since then, I still work the same job, same lot, same lights. Every now and then, I catch myself looking down at the ground a little more than I used to. Checking the angles, making sure everything lines up, because whatever that thing was, it wasn't just darker than a shadow. It felt like something that didn't belong in the light at all, like it was moving through it instead of being created by it. I noticed it because the line stopped moving. My name's Eli. I'd been out on that lake a lot, early mornings mostly before work when it's quiet and you don't see anyone else out there. It's a small lake tucked between hills, nothing special, but it's steady for bass. And that morning was cold, just before sunrise. There was a thin layer of fog sitting low over the water, not thick enough to block your view, just enough to soften everything. I'd pushed my little aluminum boat out just after 5. No wind, just the faint sound of water against the hull and the occasional ripple from fish. I cast out and let the lure sink, watching the line the way you do when you've done it long enough that it's automatic. At first, everything felt normal. Small ripples moving across the surface, fog drifting slowly, the line twitching lightly as the lure settled. Then it stopped. Not like I got a bite. More like the water itself just settled, all at once. I didn't notice it immediately. It took a few seconds for my brain to catch up. The lake had gone completely still. Not calm, still, flat like glass, no ripples, no movement. Even the fog stopped drifting and just hung there. I looked around, waiting for a breeze or something to break it. Nothing. The boat wasn't rocking anymore. It felt like it was resting on something solid. I pulled the line in slowly, more out of habit than anything. It cut through the water without making much of a ripple. That's when I saw the reflection. At first, I thought it was just the sky getting brighter. But it didn't match. It was a bright spot, high up in the reflection, just above where the hills met the sky. A clean, sharp point of light. Too steady, too defined. I leaned forward slightly, looking closer at the surface. The reflection was perfect, like a mirror. I could see the trees behind me, the faint outline of the boat, even my own shape. And right there, above it all, was that light, hanging in the reflected sky. I frowned and looked up. Nothing. Just the early morning sky starting to lighten. No stars, no planes, no clouds in that spot. I looked back down. The light was still there, exactly where it had been. Bright, steady, not flickering. It didn't move, didn't drift like you'd expect if it was something in the sky. It just stayed fixed. I shifted my position in the boat. The reflection moved with me like it should. Trees shifted, my silhouette changed, but the light stayed locked in place, like it wasn't tied to the angle at all. I felt that weird pressure in my ears then, like when you're going up a hill too fast. It wasn't painful, just noticeable. I swallowed, tried to clear it. It didn't go away. I dipped my hand into the water. Expected ripples. There weren't any. My hand went in, but the surface barely reacted, just a slight distortion like touching thick glass. I pulled it back out slowly. Water dripped normally, but the surface sealed itself again, almost instantly, perfectly flat. I stared at the reflection again. The light seemed a little brighter now, not by much, just enough that I noticed. I looked up again. Still nothing, no source, nothing that matched what I was seeing below. I started to feel uneasy then, not scared exactly, just wrong, like something wasn't lining up. I stood up in the boat slowly. It didn't rock, didn't shift, like it was anchored in place even though I hadn't dropped one. I looked around the lake. Everything was frozen, the shoreline, the trees, even the fog. It was like a paused frame. I looked back down at the reflection. The light had changed, not moved, changed. It looked closer, larger somehow. Even though it hadn't shifted position, I couldn't explain that part. It just felt like it was nearer. I took a step toward the edge of the boat, leaning over the water. My reflection moved with me, but the light didn't behave the same way. It stayed fixed, but the angle didn't make sense anymore, like it wasn't reflecting something real. That's when I heard the sound. A low hum, not loud, more like something you feel than hear. It seemed to come from above, but also from the water, like it was everywhere at once. I froze, listened. It stayed steady, didn't rise or fall, just a constant tone. The pressure in my ears got stronger. I looked up again, still nothing, just empty sky. But when I looked back down, the light in the reflection shifted slightly, not across the surface, but within it, like it had tilted. I took a step back, heart starting to race now. The hum got a little stronger, not louder, just more present. The air felt thicker, harder to breathe normally. I grabbed my rod, not even thinking why. Just needed something solid in my hands. Then, without warning, the surface of the lake broke. Not from a ripple, not from a fish. It just released, like tension snapping. The water moved again. Ripples spread out from the boat. The fog drifted. The sound of the lake came back all at once. Birds somewhere in the distance, water lapping against the hull. The hum stopped instantly. The pressure in my ears vanished. I looked down. The reflection was normal. No light, just the sky starting to brighten. I looked up, still nothing. The sky was empty, completely. I stood there for a while, trying to steady myself. Nothing else happened. Everything stayed normal. I sat back down slowly, reeled in the line again. My hands were shaking a little. I didn't stay much longer, packed up and headed back to shore. As I was rowing in, I kept glancing back at the surface, half expecting to see it again. But it was just water. moving like it always does. Even now, I think about how the light only existed in the reflection and how it felt like it was getting closer without ever actually being there. Like, it didn't need to be above the lake because somehow it was already underneath it. The chirp woke me up instantly. Not loud, just that short, sharp beep smoke detectors make when the battery's low, but it cut straight through sleep like something snapping. I sat up right away. The room was still dark, but not fully. There was a faint glow coming through the blinds, just enough to outline things. I looked at the clock on my nightstand, 3:33 a.m. I remember that specifically because it stuck out. I stayed still for a second, listening. Nothing. No second chirp. No sound from the hallway, just quiet. I swung my legs off the bed and stood up, waiting for the detector to go again. It didn't. The silence felt heavier than it should have, like the house was holding something back. I stepped into the hallway. The detector was mounted just outside my bedroom door. I looked up at it. No blinking light. No sign anything was wrong. I stood there for a few seconds, expecting another chirp. Still nothing. I walked a little further down the hall, checking the other rooms. Everything looked normal. No smell of smoke, no flickering lights, nothing out of place. I started to relax a bit, thinking maybe it was just a random glitch. It happens sometimes. Then I noticed the light. It wasn't coming from inside. It was coming through the window at the end of the hallway. Soft, pale, different from streetlight. I moved toward it slowly. The closer I got, the more I realized how even it was, not directional, not casting shadows the way it should, just filling the space. I reached the window and looked out. At first I didn't see anything, just the rooftops across the street, the faint outline of houses under the night sky. Then something shifted, a glow, above the roofs, moving, slowly. It wasn't bright, more like a washed out white barely there, but clear enough to see once I focused. It drifted across the tops of the houses, not high in the sky, low, just above the rooftops. I pressed my hand against the glass, leaning closer, trying to get a better look. There was no sound, no hum, nothing to suggest anything was moving out there, just that silent, steady motion. I checked the clock again, still 3:33. The seconds weren't moving. I frowned, staring at it, waiting for it to change. It didn't. The numbers stayed fixed. I looked back out the window. The glow had moved further down the street. Still slow, still smooth. It didn't flicker, didn't pulse, just glided. I stepped back, grabbed my phone from the nightstand, and came back to the window. Opened the camera, pointed it outside. The screen showed the street, the rooftops, but no glow. I lowered the phone, looked directly again. There it was, same position, same movement. I raised the phone again. Nothing, just darkness. I felt that pressure in my ears then, sudden, like a quick drop in altitude. I swallowed. It didn't clear. The air in the hallway felt warmer. Not by much, just enough to notice. I moved to the side window in the living room, trying to get a different angle. The glow came into view again, now closer to the edge of my block. Still moving, still silent. It passed over a streetlight, but the light didn't change, didn't dim, didn't react at all. The glow just moved through that space like it wasn't there. I noticed something else then. The shadows on the rooftops weren't shifting. They stayed fixed, even as the glow passed over them. That didn't make sense. I leaned closer to the glass, trying to see if there was any shape inside the light. There wasn't. No outline, no structure, just that soft, pale brightness. The pressure in my ears got stronger. My head felt tight, like something was pushing inward. I glanced back at the clock again. Still 3:33, not even blinking. I looked back outside. The glow slowed, not by much, but enough that I noticed. It hovered for a second above one of the houses at the end of the street. Then it shifted, not smoothly, just a quick adjustment, like it had jumped a few feet to the side. Then it continued moving. I felt that faint vibration then, not a sound, more like something traveling through the floor. Subtle, but steady. I held my breath, trying to listen. Nothing, just that sensation. The glow reached the end of the block, moved past the last house, and then it faded, not quickly, not slowly, just less, until it wasn't there anymore. The moment it disappeared, everything changed. The pressure in my ears released, the warmth in the air faded, the faint vibration stopped, and the clock ticked forward. 3:34, like nothing had happened. I stood there for a while, staring out at the empty street. Nothing moved, no cars, no lights. Everything looked normal. I went back to the hallway. Looked up at the smoke detector. Still silent, no second chirp. I waited. Nothing. I checked the other clocks in the house. All of them showed 3:34. No time lost, no mismatch. Everything lined up. I went back to bed eventually. Didn't sleep much after that. Kept listening for another chirp. It never came. The next morning, I checked the detector. Battery was fine. No warning light. No issue at all. But now, every time I hear that single chirp, even during the day, I think about how it happened exactly at 3:33 and how the clock didn't move. And how whatever that light was took just long enough to pass over the entire street, while everything else just stayed completely still. I saw the gap in the fog before I saw the light. My name's Daniel. I was driving back from a late shift, cutting through a back road that runs along the edge of a valley. It's not a route I usually take, but there'd been an accident on the main road, so I went the long way. It was just after 3 a.m. The fog started about 10 minutes in. At first, it was thin. You could still see the road, the trees, the occasional sign. Then it got thicker, fast, like I'd driven straight into it. By the time I slowed down, visibility was maybe 15 feet. Headlights just bounced back at me. Everything beyond that was just white. I dropped to about 20 miles an hour. Kept both hands on the wheel. There's no streetlights on that road, so it was just me and the fog and the sound of the engine. That's when I noticed the silence. The road noise dropped off. Not completely, but enough that I noticed. Like the fog was dampening everything. Even the engine sounded duller. I cracked the window slightly. Didn't hear much outside. No wind, no insects, nothing. Just that muted, heavy quiet. I kept driving, focused on the faint line of the road ahead. Then something changed. At first, I thought my eyes were adjusting, like maybe the fog was thinning. But it wasn't that. There was a shape ahead, a clean space, circular, where the fog just stopped. It didn't fade, didn't thin out. It just ended in a perfect edge, like a hole cut into it. I slowed down even more, barely moving now. The circle was maybe 20 or 30 feet across, centered right over the road. The fog outside had stayed thick, but inside that space, the air was completely clear. I could see the road, the trees, the ground, like normal visibility. Except it didn't extend past that boundary, just that one area. I remember thinking it looked wrong, too precise, too clean. Fog doesn't behave like that. I eased forward. The circle didn't move, it stayed in place as I approached. And that's when I saw the light. It was hanging in the center of that clear space, a dim white glow. Not bright, not casting much light, just there, suspended. Maybe 15 feet above the road. It wasn't flickering, wasn't pulsing, just steady. I checked my mirrors instinctively. Nothing behind me but fog. Looked forward again. The light was still there, unchanged. The edge of the clear space stayed sharp, like a wall. I slowed almost to a stop. The car idled quietly. I sat there for a second, just staring at it, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The pressure in my ears started then. A slow build, like going up in elevation. I swallowed. It didn't clear. I reached over and turned the radio knob. Static, just low, flat static. No stations. I turned it off. The silence came back, heavier now. I inched forward. The car rolled toward the edge of the circle. The light didn't react, didn't move, didn't change brightness. It just hung there. The pressure in my ears increased. My head felt tight, like something was pushing in from both sides. I kept moving, slow, careful. The front of the car reached the edge of the clear space. And the moment it crossed, everything changed. The fog vanished instantly. Not gradually, not pushed aside, just gone. All around me, full visibility. The trees stretched out clearly on both sides. The road was completely visible ahead. The air felt lighter. The pressure in my ears disappeared. The light was gone. There was nothing in front of me. Just empty road. I stopped the car, sat there for a second. Heart beating faster now. I looked around. No fog anywhere, like I'd driven out of it entirely. I checked the rearview mirror. Behind me, the fog was still there. A solid wall, right at the edge of where I'd come through. I put the car in reverse slightly, rolled back a few feet. The fog didn't move, didn't come closer. It just stayed fixed in place, like a boundary. I shifted back into drive, moved forward again. Everything ahead stayed clear. I got out of the car. I don't know why. I just needed to see it from outside. The air was cold, still, no wind. I walked a few steps back toward the fog. The edge was still there, perfectly defined. I reached out with my hand, touched it. It felt like normal air, but I couldn't see through it. Just white. I stepped back, looked at the road ahead again, completely normal, no sign of the light, no sign of the circle, nothing. I got back in the car, drove forward. After maybe another mile, the fog started again. Gradually this time, normal, thin at first, then thicker. Nothing unusual about it. I kept driving, got home around 4. Everything felt normal by then. But later, I checked the time on my phone. The drive should have taken 20 minutes. It had been almost 40. I don't remember anything from that extra time. Just the fog, the circle, the light, and then clear road. Now, every time I drive through fog, I find myself looking for that clean edge, that perfect break. Like the air just decides to stop being what it is, and whatever was inside that space doesn't need the fog to hide it at all. I started noticing it on the 3rd night, but looking back, it might have been there before that. My name's Ryan. I do overnight deliveries, mostly long routes between distribution centers. It's the same stretch of highway most nights, just hours of driving with much to look at, except road signs and the occasional truck. There's one section about 20 minutes outside the city where the road straightens out and cuts through open land. No buildings, no lights, just fields on either side and a guardrail that runs for miles. That's where I first saw it. A white light off to the right side of the road. Not on the ground, not in the sky either. Just suspended, maybe 30 or 40 feet up. I remember thinking it was odd, but I didn't slow down. Stuff like that happens. Distant towers, aircraft, reflections. I glanced at it as I passed. It didn't move, didn't flicker, just stayed there. Then it was behind me. I didn't think much about it until the next night. Same route, same time, same stretch of road, and the light was there again. Same position, same height, same brightness. That's when it stuck with me, because I knew that area. There wasn't anything there. No towers, no structures, nothing that could explain a fixed light in that exact spot. I kept driving, watching it in my side mirror as I passed. It stayed perfectly still, didn't react to the truck, didn't change. I checked my dash cam later. Nothing. The footage showed the road, the guardrail, the empty fields. No light. I figured maybe it was just something the camera didn't pick up. Some angle issue. But the 3rd night, it happened again. Same spot. Same light. At that point, I started paying more attention. I slowed down slightly as I approached. Watched it carefully. It didn't get bigger. Didn't get closer in the way you'd expect. It just held its position. Like it wasn't part of the road at all. I passed it again. Checked the mirror. Same thing. Perfectly still. I checked the dashcam footage when I got to the depot. Still nothing. Just empty darkness where the light should have been. That's when it started to feel off. Over the next few nights, it kept happening. Same stretch, same time window. The light was always there. Never brighter. Never dimmer. Never moving. It didn't matter if I was early or a little late. It was always in that exact spot, like it was tied to the road, or waiting. I started trying to line it up with landmarks, a certain bend in the guardrail, a mile marker. Every time, it matched. Same location. I even tried pulling slightly onto the shoulder once, just to get a longer look. The moment I slowed too much, something weird happened. The light didn't change, but the distance to it didn't either. It stayed exactly the same, like I wasn't getting closer. That's when I sped back up. Didn't want to linger. The pressure in my ears started around then too, not every night, but enough that I noticed a slight shift, like the air was thicker or like I was changing altitude without moving. The radio would cut out sometimes too, not static, just silence. Then come back a minute later like nothing happened. By the 6th night, I was watching for it before I even reached that stretch, waiting for it. Sure enough, it was there. Same place, same height, same steady white glow. I passed it again, checked the mirror, same result, nothing in the dash cam later. But the 7th night was different. I remember that one clearly. I was more tense than usual, anticipating it. I kept my eyes on the road, but I was scanning the right side constantly, waiting to see it appear. I hit the stretch where it should have been, and it wasn't there. That made my stomach drop more than seeing it. The empty space felt wrong. I kept driving, eyes moving between the road and the side. Nothing, no light, no movement, just darkness. I went past the usual spot, still nothing. I started to relax slightly, thinking maybe it was over, maybe whatever I'd been seeing was just gone. Then something changed. The radio cut out. Completely. No sound at all. At the same time, the pressure in my ears came back. Stronger than before. Sharp enough that I had to swallow a few times. I tightened my grip on the wheel, looked ahead, and that's when I saw it. The light was in front of me, not off to the side, not in the distance. Directly ahead, above the road, same height as before, same brightness. But now it was in my lane. I hit the brakes instinctively. Not hard, just enough to slow down. The light didn't move, didn't get closer, didn't get further away. It just stayed there, centered in my view. The road markings continued beneath it. The truck rolled forward slowly. The light didn't react, didn't shift. It felt like I was driving towards something fixed, but the distance never changed. I checked the speedometer, dropping, 35, 30. The light stayed exactly where it was. The pressure in my ears peaked. The silence in the cab felt heavy. I remember thinking I should stop, just pull over. But something about it made me keep moving, like stopping would make it worse. So I kept driving, slowly, toward it. The light stayed centered, unchanging. Then, without warning, it was gone. No fade, no movement, just gone. The road ahead was empty again. The radio came back on, mid-song, like it had never cut out. The pressure in my ears disappeared. Everything snapped back to normal. I pulled over then. Finally. Sat there for a minute, breathing, trying to process what had just happened. I checked the dash cam later. That part of the drive showed nothing. No light, no obstruction. Just an empty road, but the timing didn't line up. There was a gap. A stretch where the footage skipped forward slightly. Not a lot, but enough to notice. I still drive that route. I haven't seen the light since that night, but every time I reach that stretch of highway, I slow down a little, without meaning to, watching the side of the road and the space ahead, waiting to see if it's back in that same position or somewhere new, just far enough away that I can never actually reach it. I noticed the zippers before I even fully woke up. My name's Marcus. I'd gone out solo for a weekend, just one night, deep enough into the woods to get away from everything. Not a hardcore trek, maybe a couple miles off a marked trail, but far enough that you don't hear roads or see any light from town. I set up just before dark near a small clearing. Nothing special about it, just flat ground and a good spot between a few trees. I'd done it before plenty of times. Everything felt normal that night. No weird sounds, no strange weather, just the usual forest noise, bugs, leaves shifting, the occasional branch cracking somewhere in the distance. I zipped everything up before I went to sleep. That's something I'm careful about. Backpack sealed, food bag tied off and hung, tent zipped fully, no loose openings. I remember double-checking it, then I went to sleep. Sometime in the night, I woke up. Not suddenly, more like I drifted up out of sleep. There wasn't a sound that woke me, at least not one I can remember. I just opened my eyes and lay there for a second. The inside of the tent looked slightly brighter than it should have. Not lit, just less dark. I didn't move at first, just listened. The forest was quiet, too quiet, no insects, no wind, nothing. That's when I turned my head toward my pack. It was sitting just inside the tent near my feet, and the zippers were open, not wide open, just enough to notice. Every compartment, main pocket, side pouches, even the small top section, all of them slightly unzipped. I sat up slowly, heart rate picking up, but not full panic, more like confusion. I stared at it for a second, trying to process what I was seeing. I knew I'd zipped it. I always do. I reached forward and pulled one of the zippers open further, checked inside. Everything was still there. Clothes, food, gear, nothing missing, nothing out of place. I checked the others, same thing, all intact, but all partially opened. Like someone had gone through it and then stopped, or like they'd started opening everything at once and didn't finish. I looked around the inside of the tent. My boots were still where I left them. Nothing else had been disturbed. The tent zipper itself was still closed, fully. I leaned forward and touched it, ran my fingers along it. No gap, no sign it had been opened. That didn't make sense. There's no way to reach inside without opening it. I sat back slowly, listening again. Still nothing. The quiet felt heavier now, like it was pressing in. That's when I noticed the light again, stronger now that I was fully awake. A faint glow coming through the fabric of the tent. From one direction, not all around, just one side. I turned toward it, held my breath for a second, then slowly reached over and unzipped the tent. The sound of the zipper felt too loud in that silence. I paused halfway, waited. Nothing reacted. No movement. No sound. I finished unzipping and pushed the flap open slightly. Looked out. The glow was out there, between the trees, not close, maybe 30 or 40 yards away. Deep enough into the woods that it didn't reach the clearing fully. Just a soft, pale light filtering through the trunks. It didn't illuminate the ground properly, more like it outlined the shapes, gave everything a faint edge. I stepped out of the tent slowly, barefoot at first, then slipped into my boots without taking my eyes off it. The air felt warmer than it should have. Not by much, but enough to notice. I stood there, staring. The glow didn't move, didn't flicker, just stayed. I tried to see a source, something at the center of it. There wasn't one. It looked like the light existed in the space itself, not coming from anything. I took a few steps forward, careful, listening. The forest stayed silent, no branches snapping, no leaves shifting, just still. The glow seemed to recede slightly as I moved, not dramatically, but enough that it felt like I wasn't getting closer. I stopped, watched it. It held its position, same distance, same intensity. I felt that pressure in my ears then, stronger than before, like the air had changed. I swallowed. It didn't clear. I took another step forward. Same thing, the glow stayed just out of reach. I realized then that I didn't want to get closer. Not really. There was no clear reason, just a feeling. Like whatever it wasn't meant to be approached. I stood there for a while, watching it, trying to make sense of it. Then it dimmed, not gradually, just slightly, like someone turning it down a notch, and then it was gone, completely. The forest snapped back to darkness. The normal sounds returned almost immediately. Insects, leaves, a faint breeze. The pressure in my ears eased. I stood there for another minute, looking at the empty space between the trees. Nothing moved. Nothing changed. I went back into the tent, zipped it up carefully, checked my pack again. Still nothing missing. I stayed awake for a while after that. Didn't sleep much. Every small sound felt louder. Every shift in the air felt wrong. Morning came eventually, normal light, normal sounds. Everything looked exactly how it should. I packed up and left earlier than I planned. Didn't stay for breakfast, just got out of there. Later, I checked everything again at home. Went through the pack. Nothing missing, nothing added, no damage. But I keep thinking about how every zipper was open just enough to notice, and how the tent itself never moved, and how whatever that light was stayed just far enough away, like it had already been close enough, and didn't need to come any closer at all. It started with a sound I couldn't place. My name's Jordan. I was sitting out back behind my house, just on one of those folding chairs, scrolling through my phone and trying to cool off before bed. It was late, probably around midnight. Warm night, no wind, and the sky was mostly covered with thin clouds. You could still see a few stars through them, but not many. The neighborhood was quiet, not completely silent, there's always some background noise, but nothing out of the ordinary. A dog barked somewhere a few streets over, and I could hear the faint hum of traffic from the main road. Then the chirping started. It wasn't loud. It was subtle enough that I almost ignored it at first. A short, repeating sound. Not rhythmic exactly, but consistent. I paused whatever I was doing and listened. It came from above. I tilted my head slightly, trying to get a better sense of direction. The sound didn't move. Or if it did, it moved very slowly. It didn't sound like a bird. Too clean. Too even. No variation in pitch. And it didn't sound mechanical either. No buzz or hum underneath it, just that soft, sharp chirp. I stood up slowly, still listening. It continued. Same tone, same spacing. I took a few steps away from the chair into the middle of the yard. The sound got clearer, definitely coming from overhead. I looked up. At first, I didn't see anything, just clouds, thin, uneven patches drifting slowly across the sky. The kind that don't fully block the stars, just dull them. The chirping continued. I turned in a slow circle, trying to track it. It stayed above me. Not off to one side, not moving past, just above. I felt that slight pressure in my ears then, like when you're in an elevator. I swallowed. It didn't go away. I kept looking up, letting my eyes adjust. Then I saw the light. Faint. Very faint. At first I thought it was just a thinner patch of cloud letting more light through, but it moved. Slowly. Across the clouds, not blinking, not flashing, just a steady, pale glow. It didn't illuminate the clouds around it. That's what stood out. If it had been a plane or something reflecting light, you'd expect some kind of spread. There was none. It was just a small, soft point, moving. I took a step forward without realizing it. The chirping lined up with it. Same pace, same direction. I felt my chest tighten slightly. Not panic, just the kind of focused awareness. Like my brain was trying to make sense of something it couldn't categorize. I kept watching it. The movement was smooth, too smooth. No change in speed, no drift, just a straight line across the sky. I glanced at the clouds around it. They were moving too, but slower, and in a slightly different direction. The light didn't match them. It cut across them. Like it wasn't part of the same layer, the chirping didn't change. Still steady, still coming from directly above. I raised my phone and tried to film it. Pointed the camera up. On the screen, I couldn't see anything. Just dark clouds. No light, no movement. I lowered the phone and looked with my eyes again. The light was still there, clear as before. I tried again, same result. Nothing on the screen. That made my stomach drop a little. I put the phone down. Didn't want to lose sight of it. The pressure in my ears increased slightly. Not painful, just enough to notice more. The chirping got a little faster. Not by much, but enough that I caught it. I stood completely still, watching, listening. The light moved further across the sky. Still faint. Still steady. I tried to judge its size. It was small, but not as small as a star, and it didn't twinkle. It was consistent. Flat. I noticed something else then. The usual background noise had faded, no traffic, no distant sounds. Even the dog from earlier had stopped. It was just the chirping. And me, standing there, looking up. The light passed over the center of my yard, directly above me. For a second it seemed to slow, or maybe I just became more aware of it. The chirping paused, just for a beat, then resumed. I felt the pressure in my ears peak, sharp enough that I winced slightly. Then it eased. The light continued moving, now heading toward the back of the property, toward the tree line. As it reached the thicker clouds, it became harder to see, fainter, like it was slipping behind something, but the chirping stayed, still overhead, still aligned with it. I stepped backward, trying to keep it in view. The clouds shifted slightly, and for a moment I lost it, just darkness. Then it reappeared briefly, further along, fainter than before, and then it was gone. Not faded, just no longer visible. The chirping continued for a few seconds after, then stopped, completely. The silence hit all at once. Then gradually the normal sounds came back. A car in the distance, the faint hum of something electrical, the world returning to how it should be. I stood there for a minute, looking at the empty sky, waiting for something else to happen. Nothing did. I checked the time on my phone. It didn't match how long it felt like I'd been out there. It was later than I expected. By enough that it didn't sit right. I went back to my chair and sat down, tried to convince myself it was something normal, a drone, a plane. But none of that lined up. The movement, the sound, the way it didn't show up on my phone. I stayed out there for another 10 minutes or so, didn't see anything else, didn't hear that sound again. Eventually I went inside, locked the door, turned off the lights, but later, lying in bed, I kept thinking about how the sound stayed directly above me, no matter where I stood, and how the light moved through the clouds, like it wasn't affected by them at all, like it was passing through something else entirely, just out of reach, quiet, and gone before I could ever really understand what I was looking at. I noticed it about 5 minutes into the drive, just after I got off the main road. My name's Aaron. I worked late shifts at a warehouse outside town, so most nights I didn't leave until after 11. The route home was always the same, long straight roads, a couple of turns through a quieter residential stretch, then past an old water tower before getting back into my neighborhood. That night was clear and still. No wind, no traffic. Just the usual empty road and the hum of the car. I remember checking the time when I got in, 11:18. I wasn't tired, just ready to be home. I turned onto the long stretch that leads toward the water tower, and that's when I saw the light. At first, I thought it was on the tower itself. It's one of those old metal ones, tall, with a rounded top. There are no lights on it normally, but sometimes you'll see planes or reflections in the distance. This wasn't like that. The light was hovering just above the top, bright white. Not blinking, not moving. I squinted a little, trying to figure out what I was looking at. It wasn't big, but it was too defined to be a star, and it wasn't flickering like an aircraft light. I kept driving, Figured it would shift or disappear as I got closer. But it didn't. I watched it for a bit, then looked back at the road. A few seconds later, I checked again. Same position, same brightness, still directly above the water tower. I glanced at my speed. About 45, normal for that road. I drove another minute or two. The tower should have been getting closer. The light should have changed position slightly. It didn't. It stayed exactly where it was. Same distance, same angle. That's when it started to feel off. I adjusted in my seat, leaning forward slightly, trying to get a better look through the windshield. The light didn't react, didn't flare, didn't dim, just stayed. I checked my mirrors out of habit. Nothing behind me. No headlights, no other cars. The road was empty. I looked back at the tower. The light was still there, perfectly centered above it. I remember thinking maybe it was further away than I thought, like maybe it just lined up with the tower from my angle. But that didn't make sense either. Because I'd driven this route hundreds of times, I knew how that approach looked. The tower always shifted slightly as you got closer. This time it didn't. I drove another 5 minutes, same thing. The tower and the light held their position exactly. No matter how far I went, they didn't get any closer. It was like they were fixed in place. I felt that pressure in my ears then. Subtle, like when you change elevation too quickly. I swallowed. It didn't go away right away. I turned the radio on, just to have some noise. It came on, but there was no sound. No music. No static. Just silence. I turned the volume up. Still nothing. I glanced down at the display. It showed the station. Everything looked normal, but no sound came through. I turned it off again. The silence felt heavier after that. I looked back up. The light hadn't changed. Still above the tower. Still matching my position perfectly. I started to feel this low, steady unease. Not panic, just a growing sense that something wasn't right. I slowed down a bit. Maybe that would change something. Maybe I'd catch up to it. I dropped to about 30. The light stayed exactly where it was, didn't drift closer, didn't fall behind, just stayed. I checked the time again, 11:31. That didn't feel right. I should have been closer to home by then. I kept driving. The road curved slightly to the left. Normally that's where the tower shifts to the right side of your view. This time it didn't. It stayed centered, like the road hadn't curved at all. I tightened my grip on the wheel, looked at the road markings. They were curving. Everything else looked normal, just not the tower or the light. I drove for what felt like another 10 minutes, the same stretch, the same view, the same distance. The pressure in my ears built slightly, not painful, just enough to notice. Then I made a decision. I pulled over, slowly easing onto the shoulder. The car came to a stop. I kept my eyes on the light the whole time. The moment the car fully stopped, the light disappeared. Not faded, not moved, just gone, instantly. I sat there staring at the empty space above the tower. My heart was beating faster now. I stepped out of the car. The air felt still, cooler than before. I looked up again. Nothing. No light. No movement. Just the tower, dark against the sky. I walked a few steps away from the car, turned in a slow circle. The rest of the sky looked normal. Stars scattered evenly. No unusual brightness, no shapes, just quiet. I looked back at the tower. Still nothing. The pressure in my ears eased. The normal sounds came back, a distant car somewhere, the faint hum of power lines. I checked my phone, 11:46. That didn't match how long I felt like I'd been driving. At all. I got back in the car and sat there for a minute, trying to make sense of it. Then I pulled back onto the road, drove the rest of the way home. The tower passed by like it always does. Off to the right this time. Normal distance, no light above it. No strange alignment. Everything looked exactly how it should. I got home, parked, and sat in the driveway for a while before going inside. I checked the route on my phone later, just to see if I'd somehow taken a wrong turn. I hadn't. Same road, same path. But the timing didn't line up. There was a gap, a stretch of time that didn't match the distance. And the part that stays with me isn't just the light, it's how it stayed fixed in place, like it was tied to me somehow, holding that exact distance until the moment I stopped, and then it was gone. Like it only existed while I was moving toward it. And the second I tried to actually reach it, there was nothing there anymore. I was already set up when I saw it. My name's Callum. I do landscape photography, nothing professional, just something I've stuck with for years. I like going out early before sunrise, catching that quiet light before everything wakes up. That morning, I'd driven out to a stretch of moorland about 40 minutes from my house. It's mostly flat with a few low ridges, open in every direction. No buildings for miles, just fields, fences, and the occasional cluster of trees. I got there around 4:20 a.m. Still dark. Not pitch black. There was that faint hint of light on the horizon, but the stars were still visible. It was cold too. Not freezing, but enough that I kept my jacket zipped up and my hands tucked in when I wasn't adjusting the camera. I set up near a fence line overlooking a wide valley. I'd been there before, knew roughly where the sun would come up. Tripod down, camera mounted, settings dialed in. I was taking a few test shots, checking exposure, framing things up. Everything felt normal. Quiet. A little breeze moving across the grass. Nothing unusual. I remember glancing at the time, 4:37. Still had a bit before any real light. I stepped back from the camera and just stood there for a minute, looking out across the valley. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was just my eyes adjusting. A faint vertical line of light in the distance. Miles away, straight ahead, slightly to the left. It was subtle, not bright like a beam, more like a pale column, barely visible against the dark. I blinked, focused on it. It stayed, perfectly straight, extending from the ground up into the clouds. I stepped closer to the tripod instinctively, looked through the camera's viewfinder. I couldn't see it there, just the normal landscape. I pulled back, looked with my eyes again. There it was. Same place, same shape. I frowned, trying to make sense of it. My first thought was some kind of light from the ground, maybe a vehicle. But it didn't spread, didn't fan out like headlights. It was too narrow, too clean, and it went straight up into the clouds, which were thin and high, barely visible otherwise. The column didn't illuminate the clouds. It just continued into them, like it didn't stop. I stood there, watching it, trying to see if it moved. It didn't. No sway, no flicker, just a steady, faint presence. I glanced around the rest of the landscape. Nothing else looked unusual. No other lights, no movement. Just that one column. The breeze seemed to die down. I noticed it because the grass stopped moving. Everything went still. I shifted my weight slightly, feeling the cold more now. Then I realized something else. There were no sounds. No birds, no distant cars, nothing, just silence. I looked back at the column. It was still there. I raised my phone and tried to take a picture. Pointed it straight at it, took a few shots, checked the screen, nothing, just the normal horizon. I lowered the phone slowly, looked up again. The column hadn't changed. I could feel that pressure in my ears then. Subtle, like being in an airplane during descent. I swallowed. It lingered. I kept watching. I don't know how long. It couldn't have been more than a few seconds, but it felt longer, like time stretched slightly. Then, without warning, it dimmed, not faded, just reduced, like someone turning down a light. And then it was gone. Completely. No trace. The horizon looked exactly like it had before. Dark, flat, empty. The clouds above showed nothing, no residual glow, no disturbance. I stood there, staring at the spot, waiting for something else to happen. Nothing did. The breeze came back. I could hear it moving through the grass again. A bird called somewhere in the distance. The normal sounds returned. The pressure in my ears eased. I checked my phone again. The time didn't match what I expected. It was 4:44. I remember that clearly. 7 minutes had passed, but it hadn't felt like that, not even close. I went back through the photos I'd taken, the test shots before, the ones during. Nothing. No column, no light, just the landscape. I even zoomed in on the area where I'd seen it. Nothing out of place. I stood there for a while longer, waiting to see if it would happen again. It didn't. The sky gradually brightened as the sun approached. Everything looked normal. By the time the first real light hit the valley, it felt like any other morning. I packed up slowly, kept looking back toward that spot. Nothing, just fields and low hills. On the drive home, I kept thinking about how clean it had been, how precise. A straight column of light stretching from the ground into the clouds, perfectly still, and how it had only been visible to me, not the camera, not the phone, just my eyes. I've been back to that spot a few times since. Same time, same setup, same conditions, as close as I can get. I haven't seen it again, but every time I stand there before sunrise, looking out over that valley, I find myself scanning the horizon, half expecting to see that faint line again, rising straight up, quiet, and gone before I can prove it was ever there. I woke up because it felt like the heating had kicked on, but it was the middle of summer. My name's Evan. I sleep with the window cracked most nights, especially when it's warm out, so the room usually stays cool. That night, though, I came out of sleep already uncomfortable, like I'd been lying under a heavy blanket too long. The air felt thick. Not hot like a normal warm night, more like the temperature had jumped suddenly and the air hadn't caught up. I remember lying there for a second, trying to figure out what woke me. Then I noticed how quiet it was. No wind through the trees, no distant traffic, just still. I rolled onto my back and stared at the ceiling, trying to shake off that half-asleep feeling. That's when I noticed the light. It wasn't coming from inside the room, it was coming through the window. Faint, pale, just enough to change the shape of the shadows. I turned my head slowly toward it. At first, I thought it was just the moon behind clouds, but the angle was wrong, and the color wasn't right either. It was too even, too soft. I sat up a little, squinting toward the window. I don't keep my glasses on the nightstand. I leave them on the dresser across the room, so everything outside looked slightly blurred, but I could still see it, glow, hanging above the trees behind my house. There's a small wooded area back there, maybe 50 yards from the fence line. Nothing big, just a cluster of trees that separates the neighborhood from the next stretch of land. The glow was above that, not touching the ground, not lighting up the trees from below, just suspended. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees, trying to focus. The shape wasn't clear, just a patch of light. Oval, maybe? Hard to tell without my glasses. I remember thinking I should grab them, but I didn't move right away, I just watched. The glow didn't flicker, didn't pulse. It stayed perfectly steady. And the weird thing was, it didn't seem to illuminate anything around it. The trees beneath it were still dark. The sky around it wasn't brighter. It was like the light existed on its own. Separate. I swung my legs off the bed and stood up. The floor felt warmer than it should have. Not hot, just wrong. I walked slowly across the room toward the dresser. The glow stayed in the same place, same size, same intensity. I kept my eyes on it as I reached for my glasses. For a second, I looked down to grab them. Just a second. Then I put them on and looked back at the window. The glow was gone completely. No fade, no movement, just empty darkness above the trees. I stood there, staring, waiting for it to come back. Nothing did. I stepped closer to the window, pressed my hand lightly against the glass. It felt slightly warm. Not by much, but enough to notice. I leaned forward, looking out more carefully now that everything was clear. The trees looked normal. Dark outlines against the sky, no light source, no movement, no sign that anything had been there. I opened the window a bit more and leaned out. The air outside felt cooler than inside the room. A light breeze picked up as soon as I opened it, like it had been waiting. I listened. The usual night sounds came back, leaves rustling, a distant car, even a faint hum from somewhere far off. I pulled back inside and closed the window. Turned around slowly, scanning the room. Everything looked normal. The shadows had gone back to how they usually were. No extra light, no strange angles. I checked the time on my phone. 2:13 a.m. That didn't feel right. I was sure it had been earlier when I woke up. I sat on the edge of the bed, trying to think it through. Maybe I'd just been more awake than I thought. Maybe I'd been up longer, but it didn't feel like that. I lay back down, still facing the window, kept watching it, half expecting the glow to come back. It didn't. The room slowly cooled down again. I could feel the difference. Like whatever had been heating, it had just stopped. I must have fallen asleep eventually. When I woke up in the morning, everything felt normal. Temperature fine, nothing out of place. I went outside later that day, walked back toward the tree line just to see if there was anything unusual. Nothing. No marks. No burned patches. No signs of anything. Just dirt, grass, and trees. But now, every once in a while, I wake up in the middle of the night and sit there for a second, waiting to feel that same warmth again. And looking at the window, wondering if I'll see that same pale glow hanging there, just long enough to disappear the moment I try to really look at it. I woke up because the room was too bright. Not like daylight, just brighter than it should have been for that time. My name's Joel. I live in a semi-detached house, quiet street, nothing unusual about it. This happened in the middle of winter, so nights were long and dark. I remember that part clearly. I opened my eyes and didn't move at first. Just laid there trying to figure out what was off. The light in the room had a blue tint to it. Faint, but noticeable. It wasn't coming from the window. That's what threw me immediately. The curtains were closed, and even if they weren't, the street outside doesn't have lighting that strong, and definitely not that color. I turned my head slightly toward the window. Still dark behind the curtains, no glow leaking through the edges, but the room was still lit, softly, evenly, like the light wasn't coming from any one direction. I pushed myself up on one elbow. The glow didn't shift, didn't cast shadows the way it should have. Everything just looked flat, muted. My wardrobe, the chair in the corner, the door, everything was visible, but none of it had clear edges. I remember focusing on the wall across from the bed. The light looked like it was inside it, not shining onto it, inside it, like the wall itself was faintly glowing. I blinked a few times, trying to clear my vision. Same thing, the light wasn't coming from the ceiling either. I looked up, nothing there, no fixture on, no source, just that same blue tone filling the space. I reached for my phone on the bedside table. The screen lit up normally when I tapped it. The brightness looked wrong against the room, too sharp, too real compared to everything else. The time said 3:12 a.m. I sat up a bit more. The bed sheets looked pale under the light. My hands too. Not blue exactly, but washed out. I held one up in front of me. The edges of my fingers didn't look right, like they were slightly blurred. I lowered my hands slowly. The air felt still, not heavy, just still. No sound, no hum, nothing from outside. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, intending to stand, but I hesitated. Something about it didn't feel right, like moving too quickly would break something. I stayed there, sitting on the edge, looking around, trying to understand where the light was coming from. I focused on the door. The gap at the bottom where it meets the floor was dark, no light coming from the hallway. I looked back at the wall, still glowing faintly. I leaned forward slightly, closer to it. The light didn't get brighter, didn't change. It just stayed consistent. I remember thinking maybe it was something outside, something reflecting in a way I didn't understand, but it didn't make sense. The glow was too even, too contained. Then it changed, not gradually, just less. The brightness dropped slightly. I froze, watched the wall. The glow dimmed again, like someone turning a dial down. I stood up quickly that time, took one step toward the wall. The light dimmed once more, now barely there. I reached out, almost touching the surface, and then it was gone. Instantly. No fade, no transition, just gone. The room snapped back to normal darkness. It felt sudden, heavy, like something had been removed. I stood there in the dark, my hands still halfway out. My eyes took a second to adjust. Everything looked normal again. Shadows where they should be, edges sharp. No glow. I stayed still, listening. The usual sounds came back. A faint car passing somewhere far off. The house settling. The house settling. Normal. I stepped over to the window and pulled the curtain back slightly. The street outside was empty, dark, nothing unusual, no blue light, no source. I let the curtain fall back into place, stood there for a while, then checked my phone again. 3:13. Just 1 minute had passed, but it didn't feel like that. I went back to bed, lay there on my back, staring at the ceiling, half expecting the light to come back. It didn't. Everything stayed normal. Eventually, I fell asleep again. The next morning, I checked the walls, ran my hand along them. Nothing different. No marks. No warmth. Nothing. I tried to recreate it in my head, figure out what could have caused it, but the part I keep coming back to is how the light didn't behave like light. It didn't enter the room, didn't reflect, didn't cast shadows. It just existed. Everywhere. It's like it wasn't passing through the walls, but coming from them, as if for that short time, the room itself was the source. The compass didn't snap or jitter like you'd expect. It just started drifting. My name's Lewis. I was hiking alone along a ridge trail in the Peak District early morning. Not completely remote, but quiet enough that you can go an hour without seeing anyone if you pick the right route. It was one of those gray mornings where the sky is just a flat sheet of cloud. No sun visible, but it's still bright enough to see clearly. I'd started just after 6. The air was cold, damp, and still. The kind of still where sound doesn't carry far. I had my phone with me, but I like using a compass on hikes. Habit, more than anything, keeps me oriented without relying on signal. Everything had been normal up until that point. Trail was easy to follow. Ground was a bit soft from rain the night before, but nothing bad. No wind, no noise except my own steps and the occasional distant bird. I stopped for a minute near a higher section of the ridge, just to check my direction. The path splits up there, and it's easy to drift off if you're not paying attention. I pulled the compass out, held it flat. At first, I thought I wasn't holding it steady. The needle wasn't pointing properly. It was moving, slowly, not spinning wildly, just drifting in a steady circle. I tilted it slightly, thinking maybe it was the angle. Same thing. The needle kept moving, slow, smooth, like it wasn't settling on anything. I frowned and stepped a few feet to the side, thinking maybe there was something metallic nearby, throwing it off. There wasn't anything around, just grass, rocks, and the trail. I tried again, same result. The needle kept rotating, not fast, not erratic, just a steady, calm spin. That's when I noticed how quiet it had gotten. I hadn't been paying attention to it before, but now it stood out. No birds, no wind, nothing. Even my footsteps sounded dull. I looked up from the compass. The ridge stretched out ahead of me, dipping slightly before rising again. That's when I saw the light. It was far off, at the next rise, hovering just above the ridge line. At first, I thought it was someone with a headlamp, but it didn't move, and it wasn't flickering like a normal light would at that distance. It just sat there, small, bright, but not harsh, more like a soft white point. I squinted, trying to make out any shape around it. There wasn't one, just the light. I looked back down at the compass, still spinning. Same slow, steady motion. I turned in place slightly, watching the needle. It didn't react to my movement, it just kept drifting. I looked back up at the ridge. The light hadn't moved, still in the exact same spot. I felt that pressure in my ears then, subtle, like a shift in altitude. I swallowed. It didn't clear. The air felt heavier somehow, hard to explain, not thick like fog, just denser. I took a step forward along the trail, then another. My eyes stayed on the light. It didn't get any closer, didn't get brighter. It just stayed exactly where it was, same size, same intensity, like distance didn't apply to it. I stopped again, looked down at the compass. The needle slowed, not by much, but enough to notice. Still moving, just not as smoothly. I looked up again. The light was still there, unchanged. I tried to focus on it harder, like if I stared long enough I'd see what it actually was. But the more I looked, the harder it was to keep it in focus. Not like it was blurry, more like my eyes didn't want to settle on it. I blinked a few times, rubbed my eyes, looked again, still there. Same spot, same brightness. I felt a faint vibration under my feet, barely noticeable, like standing near a distant generator. I shifted my weight. The ground felt solid, no visible movement, but I could feel it. Steady, low, in sync with nothing I could hear. I looked back down at the compass. The needle slowed more. Then it stopped, pointed north, perfectly still. I waited a second. It didn't move again. I looked up. The ridge ahead was empty. No light. Nothing hovering. Just grass and rock. I blinked. Took a step forward. Still nothing. The spot where the light had been looked completely normal. No change in color. No mark. No sign anything had been there. The pressure in my ears faded. The air felt normal again. I stood there for a minute, just staring at the ridge, waiting for something to happen. Nothing did. After a few seconds, I heard a bird somewhere off to the side, then another. The quiet broke. Wind picked up slightly across the grass. Everything felt normal again. I checked the compass one more time. The needle stayed steady, exactly where it should be. I continued along the trail, got to the next rise, the exact spot where I'd seen the light. There was nothing there. No tracks, no equipment, no person. Just empty ground. I stood there longer than I should have, looking around, trying to match what I saw from a distance with what was actually there. It didn't line up, at all. I finished the hike and made it back without anything else happening. But I kept checking the compass the whole way, every few minutes, half expecting it to start drifting again. It didn't. It worked perfectly. What stuck with me wasn't just the light. It was how the compass behaved, like something had been interfering with it. But only while that light was there, and only in that moment. As if whatever I was looking at was affecting direction itself, just long enough for me to notice before everything snapped back, like it had never been off at all. The static started before I ever saw anything. My name's Rick Alvarez. I've been driving long haul for about 11 years, mostly West Coast routes. There's a stretch in Nevada I used to take a lot. Long, empty highway cutting through flat desert with nothing around for miles. You get used to quiet out there. But this was different. The first time it happened, I didn't think much of it. My CB just started filling with static as I got closer to a certain mile marker. Not loud, not screeching, just a low, steady hiss that pushed everything else out. I adjusted the volume, checked the channel, nothing changed. Then about a mile later it cleared, perfectly clean again. I figured it was interference, maybe some kind of tower or equipment nearby. Except there was nothing out there, no buildings, no power lines, nothing, just open desert. It happened again the next night. Same route, same time, roughly. As I approached that stretch, the CB started hissing again. Same kind of static. Same range, about a mile or two. Then it stopped once I passed through. I started paying attention after that. Marked the location roughly in my head. There's a sign out there, one of those faded green ones with a county road number on it. The static always started a little before that. Always stopped just after. I mentioned it to another driver over the radio one time. He didn't know what I was talking about. Said his radio worked fine through there. I figured maybe it was just my equipment, loose wiring or something, but everything else worked perfectly. Only that one spot gave me issues. After a few weeks, it just became part of the route. I'd drive, static would kick in, then it would clear. Routine. Until the night I saw it. It was late, closer to 2 a.m., clear sky, no clouds, you could see the stars really well out there. I was running steady, no traffic ahead or behind for miles. CB was quiet, normal. As I got closer to that stretch, I found myself waiting for the static, watching the mile markers. Sure enough, just before I reached the sign, the static started. Same low hiss, filling the speaker. I reached over and turned the volume down slightly. Didn't bother trying to fix it this time, just let it run. I kept my eyes on the road, headlights cutting a clean path ahead. Then I noticed something. At first I thought it was just a reflection, a faint glow in the distance, centered over the road. I leaned forward slightly, squinting. It wasn't a reflection, it was a light, pale, almost white, but not harsh, just soft, sitting above the road, not far ahead, maybe a few hundred yards. I slowed down a little, didn't take my eyes off it, the light didn't move, didn't flicker, just hovered there, perfectly still. I checked my mirrors, still no one behind me, no headlights coming the other way, just me and that light. The static on the CB got stronger. Not louder exactly, just thicker, like it was filling more space. I rolled down the window slightly. The air outside was still, no wind, no sound, just that low hiss from the radio. I kept driving, slowly. The light stayed in place, didn't get closer in the way you'd expect. It just remained. Same size, same brightness, like distance didn't matter. I eased off the accelerator more, didn't want to rush it, didn't want to get too close too fast. As I got within what felt like maybe 100 yards, I could see it clearer. It wasn't attached to anything. No pole, no vehicle, no structure, just a sphere, or close to one. Hard to tell exactly. It had no edges that caught the light, no visible surface, just a smooth, uniform glow, hovering maybe 10 feet above the road. I felt that pressure in my ears then, like when you go up in altitude too quickly. I swallowed. It didn't clear. The air inside the cab felt heavier. I gripped the wheel tighter, kept moving forward. The light didn't react, didn't shift, didn't rise or fall. It just stayed there, waiting. I got closer, 50 yards, 40. Still no change. The static on the CB was constant now. No brakes, no voices. Just that steady hiss. I remember thinking I should stop, pull over, but something in me didn't want to. I just wanted to pass it, keep going. I eased the truck forward, closer, closer. As I reached what should have been right under it, it moved. Not away, up, straight up, fast. But not sudden like a flash, more like a smooth lift. 1 second it was 10 feet above the road, the next it was above the cab, then higher, higher. No sound, no change in brightness, just rising. I craned my neck, looking up through the windshield. The light kept going, straight up into the sky, no arc, no drift, just vertical. Until it got small enough to blend with the stars, then it was gone, just like that. The static cut out instantly. The CB went silent, clear, like nothing had happened. The pressure in my ears released. The air felt normal again. I kept driving, didn't stop, didn't slow down any further, just kept going. Hands tight on the wheel, eyes forward. The road looked exactly the same as it always did. No mark where the light had been, no change in the pavement, nothing. I passed the sign, kept going for another 10 miles before I even thought about pulling over. When I finally did, I just sat there for a minute, engine idling, CB quiet, trying to make sense of it. The next time I drove that route, I paid attention again, watched for the static. It still happened. Same spot, same stretch. But I never saw the light again. Just that empty section of road where the radio goes dead, like something is still there, just out of sight, affecting everything it touches, except this time, not showing itself at all. The power went out just after midnight. I was still awake, sitting on the couch with the TV on low, half watching something I wasn't really paying attention to. My name's Aaron. I live in a small suburban area, rows of identical houses, fenced backyards, a couple of streetlights on each block. Everything just cut at once. TV, lamps, the hum of the fridge in the kitchen. Gone. The room dropped into total darkness so fast it took a second to register. I sat there for a few seconds, waiting for something to kick back on. Sometimes the power flickers, comes right back. This didn't. The silence settled in. Not complete silence, just the kind where you suddenly notice everything else. The faint ticking of something in the wall, the sound of my own breathing. I stood up and went to the window. Outside was darker than usual. The streetlights were off, every house blacked out. A couple of windows had faint light, probably people using their phones, but mostly it looked empty. I pulled the curtain back a bit more. That's when I noticed the sky. At first I thought it was just my eyes adjusting, but there was a section of it that looked off. Not bright, just slightly lighter than the rest. A soft glow, almost like a cloud reflecting light, but there weren't any clouds I could see. The sky had been clear earlier. I leaned closer to the glass. The glow wasn't moving like clouds would. It wasn't spreading either. It just sat there, perfectly still, maybe a few degrees above the rooftops, just past the line of houses across the street. I grabbed my phone and turned the flashlight on, mostly out of habit. It lit up the room behind me, but outside it didn't change anything. The glow stayed the same. I stepped away from the window, slipped on my shoes, and went out the front door. The air felt warmer than I expected. Not hot, just heavier. The whole street was quiet. A couple of people were outside too, one guy across the road standing on his driveway looking up, a woman further down the block holding her phone, talking to someone, but no one was really speaking to each other. I walked a few steps down the driveway and looked up again. The glow was clearer from outside. It wasn't like lightning behind clouds. There were no flashes, no pulses, just a steady, soft light sitting in one part of the sky. It didn't bleed outward, didn't illuminate anything around it. It just existed. I tried to figure out where it could be coming from. There's a small industrial area a few miles away, but it wouldn't line up with where I was looking. And even if it did, the light wouldn't look like that. It didn't look artificial in a normal way, more like filtered. I took a few more steps into the street. The guy across from me, Mark, I think his name is, called out, "You see that?" I nodded. Yeah. That's not normal, right? No, I said, it's not. We both just stood there, watching it. It didn't change, didn't flicker, didn't move with the wind. The trees around us were still, no breeze. I noticed then how quiet it was outside. No cars passing, no distant traffic. That's what stood out. Even at night, there's usually something. But it was just empty. I could hear someone's footsteps a few houses down. That was it. I pulled my phone out again and opened the camera, pointed it at the sky. The screen showed the same thing I was seeing, but dimmer. The glow didn't stand out as much. I snapped a photo anyway. Checked it. It looked flat, like the camera didn't know how to process it. I lowered the phone. The glow looked slightly stronger now, not brighter exactly, just more defined, like its edges were clearer. I squinted, trying to see if there was anything inside it, any shape, any movement. There wasn't, just that uniform, soft light. Mark stepped a little further into the road. "Do you hear anything?" he asked. I listened. Nothing. No. Me neither. We stood there for a while, maybe a minute, maybe longer. Time felt strange. I kept expecting something to happen. A sound, a change. But it just stayed the same. Then, without any warning, it dimmed. Not slowly, just less. Like someone turned it down slightly. I blinked, thinking I imagined it. But Mark said, Did you see that? Yeah, it dimmed again. Another step down, still visible, but weaker. I felt a slight pressure in my ears, like when you go up in an elevator. I swallowed. It didn't clear. The air felt heavier again. I shifted my weight, suddenly aware of how still everything was. The glow dimmed one more time. Now it was barely there. A faint patch against the sky. Then it was gone. No fade, no movement. Just gone. The sky looked normal again, stars visible where it had been. Mark let out a breath. Okay, he said quietly. That was weird. I didn't respond. I was still staring at the spot, waiting for something else. Nothing came. A few seconds later, the streetlights flicked back on. One by one, houses lit up again. You could hear things returning, someone's TV through an open window, a car starting somewhere nearby. The normal sounds came back, even the insects. That constant background noise returned like nothing had happened. I checked my phone, 12:58. I could have sworn it had been closer to 12:40 when the power went out. I scrolled back to the photo I took. The glow was barely visible in it, just a faint patch, not nearly as clear as it had looked in person. I looked up again. The sky was empty, completely normal. But the part that stuck with me wasn't the light itself. It was how it didn't behave like anything else I'd ever seen. It didn't spread, didn't flicker, didn't move. It just sat there. Like it wasn't part of the sky at all, just placed there for a while until it wasn't anymore. I noticed the silence before anything else. My name's Tom. I was driving back from visiting my brother, cutting through a rural road that runs between farmland and patches of woods. It's the kind of road you only take if you know it's there. No streetlights, barely any traffic, just a narrow strip of asphalt with fields on either side. It was late, probably around 11:30. Warm night, windows down. I remember that clearly because of the sound. There were insects everywhere. That constant background noise you get out in the countryside, crickets, whatever else is out there. It filled the car, steady and loud enough that you stop noticing it after a while. I'd been driving like that for maybe 15 minutes. Just the road ahead, the headlights, and that wall of sound. Then it stopped. Not faded, not died down, stopped, all at once, like someone had flipped a switch. The sudden quiet was so sharp it made me lift my foot off the accelerator without thinking. The engine sound felt too loud. The tires on the road sounded different. Everything felt exposed. I slowed down, glancing out the window. The fields looked the same, dark, flat, nothing moving. But the silence didn't feel natural. I've heard quiet before out there. This wasn't that. This felt empty, like something had cleared the space. That's when I heard the hum. Low, faint. Not coming from the car, not coming from the road. It was outside. I couldn't tell where exactly. It didn't sound like it was coming from a direction. More like it was just there. I eased off the gas more, letting the car roll. The hum stayed steady, didn't rise or fall, didn't change as I slowed down. I reached over and turned the radio off, even though it was already low. Wanted to hear it clearly. The silence pressed in harder without the insects. Just that low hum sitting underneath everything. I felt that pressure in my ears then, subtle at first, like driving up a hill. I swallowed. It didn't go away. I kept driving, slower now, eyes moving between the road and the fields. That's when I saw the light, off to the right, out in the field. At first it was barely there, a faint glow like something reflecting light. But there were no other lights around, no houses, no cars, nothing that could be causing a reflection. I slowed down even more. The light grew clearer as I approached. Still dim, still soft, but definitely there, suspended above the ground, not high, maybe 20 feet up. I could see the grass below it, but it wasn't lit up the way it should have been. The light didn't spread, didn't cast shadows, it just existed in that one space. I pulled over, didn't even think about it. Just eased the car to the side of the road and stopped. The engine idled quietly, the hum stayed steady. I stared out the window, the light didn't move, didn't flicker, just hung there. I opened the door slowly. The air outside felt warmer than inside the car, not by much, but noticeable. I stepped out, closed the door behind me. The hum felt stronger outside, not louder, just more present, like it was inside my head as much as in the air. I stood there for a second, looking at the field. The light stayed in place, perfectly still. The grass around it wasn't moving, no wind, no insects, nothing, just that glow. I took a few steps off the road, onto the edge of the field. The ground felt normal under my shoes, dry, firm. The light didn't react, didn't get closer or further away. It stayed at the same distance. I kept walking, slowly, careful. The pressure in my ears got stronger, sharp enough now that I winced slightly. I swallowed again. Still didn't clear. The hum stayed constant. I stopped after maybe 10 steps. Didn't feel right going further. The light looked wrong up close. Not brighter, just more defined, like it had edges that weren't quite visible before. I tried to focus on the center of it. There wasn't anything there. No shape, no source, just that pale, steady glow. I felt a slight vibration through the ground then, barely noticeable, but steady, like something deep below was humming in sync with the sound. I looked down at my feet. The grass wasn't moving. The ground wasn't shifting, but I could feel it. I looked back up. The light shifted, not across the field, up, just slightly, maybe a few feet higher. Then it stopped again. The pressure in my ears spiked, sharp, almost painful. I stepped back instinctively. The hum didn't change. The light stayed in place. I took another step back, then another. Each step felt easier, like the air was loosening. The pressure eased slightly. I reached the edge of the road again, stopped, watched. The light dimmed. Not gradually, just slightly less. Then again. Each time it dimmed, the hum softened. The pressure in my ears dropped. I stood there, breathing slowly. The light faded one more time, then it was gone. No movement. No trail, just gone. The hum stopped instantly. The silence held for a second, then the insects came back, all at once, loud, overwhelming, like nothing had happened. I stood there for a while, looking at the empty field, trying to make sense of it. Nothing moved, nothing changed. I got back in the car eventually. Sat there with the engine running. The normal sounds felt strange now. Too loud, too busy. I drove the rest of the way home without stopping again. But now, every time I'm out there at night, when the insects are loud, I find myself waiting for that moment when they all cut out at once, because that silence, it didn't feel like the absence of sound. It felt like something had pushed everything else out of the way, just long enough to be there without anything interfering. I was sitting on the porch when the light came on. My name's Dean. It was late, maybe around 1 a.m., one of those quiet nights where you just sit outside because it's cooler than inside. I had a drink with me, phone in my pocket, just watching the street. Nothing unusual at first. No cars passing, no people out, just the occasional breeze and the hum of distant traffic way off somewhere you can't see. The porch light behind me was off. The only light came from the street lamp down the block and the faint glow from inside the house. Then the motion light snapped on. It's mounted right above the door, angled to cover the steps and part of the yard. It's pretty sensitive, but not usually that sensitive. I turned slightly, expecting to see something, maybe a cat, maybe something moving through the bushes. There was nothing. The yard was still. No movement. The light stayed on. I leaned forward a bit, looking across the grass. Nothing. I waited for it to shut off. It didn't. It just stayed on, casting that harsh white light over everything. I stood up, stepped off the porch, and walked a few feet into the yard. Still nothing. No sound. No movement. I looked toward the street. Empty. That's when I noticed how quiet it was. Not completely silent, but quieter than it should have been. No insects, no distant dog barking, just that faint hum from far away. I turned back toward the porch. The light was still on. I waved my hand in front of the sensor. No change. It didn't flicker, didn't react, just stayed on like it had been triggered by something that wasn't there anymore. I stepped back onto the porch and sat down again, keeping my eyes on the yard. Something felt off. Not enough to panic. Just enough to make me pay attention. I reached for my drink, took a sip, and leaned back. That's when I looked up. The moon was out, almost full, is sitting low enough that I could see it clearly above the rooftops across the street. I stared at it for a second without thinking. Then something crossed it. At first, I thought it was a bird, just a dark shape moving across the face of the moon. But it didn't move like a bird. It didn't flap, didn't change shape. It just slid across, smooth, silent, too steady. I leaned forward, squinting. The shape was dim, not completely solid, more like something barely blocking the light, like a shadow that wasn't fully there. It moved from one side of the moon to the other in a straight line. No wobble, no shift, just a clean, steady path. Then it was past it, into the dark sky. I kept watching, trying to track it. For a second, I thought I could still see it. A faint outline moving against the stars, but then it blended in. Gone. I stayed still, looking at the same spot, waiting for it to reappear. Nothing. I lowered my gaze back toward the yard. The porch light was still on, unchanged. I stood up again, walked back down the steps. This time I went further, halfway across the yard. The grass felt normal under my feet. No wind, no sound. I turned slowly, scanning everything. The house, the street, the trees, nothing moved. I looked back up at the sky. The moon was clear, no shapes crossing it, no movement, just still. I noticed then that the pressure in my ears had started, subtle, like a change in altitude. I swallowed. It didn't go away. I rubbed my jaw, trying to clear it. Still there. I stood there for a while longer, just listening, waiting. The hum I'd noticed earlier felt slightly stronger now, not louder, just more present, like it was closer. Or maybe I was just focusing on it more. I stepped back toward the porch. As soon as my foot hit the first step, the porch light clicked off. Instantly. No fade, no delay, just off. I froze for a second, looked back at the yard. Still nothing there. I stepped fully onto the porch, waited. Nothing. The light stayed off. I turned around slowly and sat back down. My eyes kept drifting back up to the moon, half expecting that shape to cross it again. It didn't. Everything stayed normal after that. The insects came back gradually, first one or two sounds, then more, until the usual noise filled in again. The pressure in my ears faded. The hum became less noticeable. I checked the time on my phone, 1:17. I could have sworn it had been closer to 1 when the light first came on. I sat there a while longer, trying to convince myself it had been something simple. A bird. A glitchy sensor. But the way the light had stayed on, and the way that shape moved, it didn't match anything I'd seen before. What stuck with me most was how those two things happened at the same time. The light triggering for no reason, and that shape crossing the moon. Like, whatever set the sensor off was the same thing moving above me, just out of sight, except for that one moment when it passed in front of something bright enough to finally show that it was there. The chirp woke me up instantly. Not loud, just that short, sharp beep smoke detectors make when the battery's low, but it cut straight through sleep like something snapping. I sat up right away. The room was still dark, but not fully. There was a faint glow coming through the blinds, just enough to outline things. I looked at the clock on my nightstand, 3:33 a.m. I remember that specifically because it stuck out. I stayed still for a second, listening. Nothing. No second chirp. No sound from the hallway. Just quiet. I swung my legs off the bed and stood up, waiting for the detector to go again. It didn't. The silence felt heavier than it should have, like the house was holding something back. I stepped into the hallway. The detector was mounted just outside my bedroom door. I looked up at it. No blinking light, no sign anything was wrong. I stood there for a few seconds, expecting another chirp. Still nothing. I walked a little further down the hall, checking the other rooms. Everything looked normal. No smell of smoke, nothing out of place. I started to relax a bit, thinking maybe it was just a random glitch. It happens sometimes. Then I noticed the light. It wasn't coming from inside. It was coming through the window at the end of the hallway, soft, pale, different from street light. I moved toward it slowly. The closer I got, the more I realized how even it was. Not directional, not casting shadows the way it should. Just filling the space. I reached the window and looked out. At first, I didn't see anything, just the rooftops across the street, the faint outline of houses under the night sky. Then something shifted, a glow, above the roofs, moving, slowly. It wasn't bright, more like a washed-out white, barely there, but clear enough to see once I focused. It drifted across the tops of the houses, not high in the sky, low, just above the rooftops. I pressed my hand against the glass, leaning closer, trying to get a better look. There was no sound, no hum, nothing to suggest anything was moving out there, just that silent, steady motion. I checked the clock again, still 3:33. The seconds weren't moving. I frowned, staring at it, waiting for it to change. It didn't. The numbers stayed fixed. I looked back out the window. The glow had moved further down the street, still slow, still smooth. It didn't flicker, didn't pulse, just glided. I stepped back, grabbed my phone from the nightstand, and came back to the window. Opened the camera, pointed it outside. The screen showed the street, the rooftops, but no glow. I lowered the phone, Looked directly again. There it was. Same position, same movement. I raised the phone again. Nothing, just darkness. I felt that pressure in my ears then. Sudden, like a quick drop in altitude. I swallowed. It didn't clear. The air in the hallway felt warmer. Not by much, just enough to notice. I moved to the side window in the living room, trying to get a different angle. The glow came into view again, now closer to the edge of my block. Still moving, still silent. It passed over a streetlight, but the light didn't change. Didn't dim, didn't react at all. The glow just moved through that space like it wasn't there. I noticed something else then. The shadows on the rooftops weren't shifting. They stayed fixed, even as the glow passed over them. That didn't make sense. I leaned closer to the glass, trying to see if there was any shape inside the light. There wasn't. No outline, no structure. Just that soft, pale brightness. The pressure in my ears got stronger. My head felt tight,